Well, thanks for coming, everybody. There's a lot of you, as we've noticed. So let me give my face here. So I'm Beth, relatively new DA, and working with Christy and Deanna today on this presentation of the Equalization Study Sales Validation Program. So that being said, let's see, we have, as I said, Christy and Deanna, myself. We have Jen and Teresa, Jen and Teresa and Barb in the background there, and Pat Santoso is also here from VPA I. So I think we have a really well-rounded house here, ready to jump in. Okay, so I am sort of the reader, trying out my sea legs here, introducing the slides, Deanna and Christy responding. So let's go to that first slide. What is the equalization study and what is the purpose? So as a lister, you are tasked with maintaining equity within your town assessments as economic forces operate differently on different portions of your grand list. Because the grand list forms the basis of assessment of the statewide education tax, it is important to ensure fairness and equity among towns. The Department of Taxes conducts an annual study, that is the equalization study, to determine the equalized education grand list of each school district, the common level of appraisal, and the coefficient of dispersion. It is very important that the listers actively participate in the study and analyze the results to ensure their city or town is receiving fair treatment. So, Deanna, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. And I just let you know, you don't have to keep your camera on. It'll actually help with those that don't have good bandwidth for their internet on their end.
Right. Yep.
All right. So as many of you are familiar, we ask you folks each year to review 1 year of sales from April 1st to March 30th of the previous year to supplement the prior 2 years of sales that were already completed to gauge your town's common level of appraisal and coefficient of dispersion, as Beth just said. That CLA has a direct impact, as many of you know, on your tax rates. So it's something that we definitely want to pay some close attention to. The COD is no longer a trigger for reappraisal, but it is still a very important measure of the equity within your grand list. Christy, do you have anything to add there?
I think the most important part for people, and I'm going to talk in layman's terms in case there's any brandy new listers here, is to understand that what we're doing is we're kind of giving you a report card, so to speak. We're looking at sales in your town compared to your assessed value for those sales. And in order to do that and make our measure appropriate, we only want to include sales that are what we determine to be valid, good sales that represent your market. And we'll talk about what that means more. But it's very, very important because, as Deanna said, it has multiple effects for the town financially, reappraisal-wise, and so forth. So it's really important that we get good data in our study and that we only include sales that are what we determine to be fair market or arm's length transactions, which is what we're going to talk about next.
Yeah. Great. So what is fair market value in property assessment? So generally speaking, property is to be appraised at its fair market value, and fair market value defined in Title 32 VSA 3481(1) as the following. The estimated fair market value of a property is the price that the property will bring in the market when offered for sale and purchased by another, taking into consideration all the elements of the availability of the property, its use, both potential and prospective, any functional deficiencies, and all other elements such as age and condition which combine to give property a market value. In determining estimated market value, the sale price of the property in question is one element to consider, but is not solely determinative. So, Deanna, anything more you want to add there?
Yeah, I'll just, put a little plug in here that this is one thing that is often hard to wrap our heads around, the fair market value, because we value property based on the year of reappraisal. Certainly as towns are going through those reappraisals more frequently, it's a little bit easier to gauge, but there are still towns out there that haven't reappraised in 10 years. So achieving fair market value looks a little bit different. We do this study.
Okay.
Oh, can you hear me?
You cut out a little.
Yeah.
Oh,
Keep
all
going.
right. So that is a big reason why we do this study, right? So that CLA is essentially an adjustment to your assessed values to estimate fair market value in the current market. Is it perfect? Of course not, but that's the best that we have, and we're going to use that. The other important piece here, and we will touch on this in probably every course that we give relating to fair market value, is that the sale price is a good indicator and something to consider, but it is not the sole determining factor for your fair market value. Anything else there, Christy?
So just a couple of things again, if you're new to listing and new to assessment, the common level of appraisal is what we determine that we then use to convert your grand list values to 100%. That is what's called equalizing. For example, if we said you were at 70% CLA, common level of appraisal, based on your sales, we would then convert that to 100%, and that is the equalization process. So in theory, we're bringing all towns to 100% of fair market value through equalization so that everyone is treated at 100% for education liability purposes. That is the reason we do this, right? So when we talk in these terms of equalization, I just want you to be able to understand what we mean when we're saying that. And the other piece is what's called the COD, coefficient of dispersion, and it sounds like a lot of words, but basically what that's doing statistically is saying how fair is the town assessing from one property to another? Are they assessing some properties at above fair market value, 20% above fair market value, and some properties at 30% below fair market value? And what we're looking at there is the spread of that fairness, what we call the equity. So that's what the COD is measuring. And those two things are a product of this equalization study that we do each year. Okay, the common level, as we mentioned, will directly affect your equalization, which affects tax rates and education liability. It goes directly onto your tax rate. And the COD will determine whether or not you need to reappraise. Okay, so you could be ordered to reappraise based on the results of the COD piece. And then the last piece I would add to this is when we talk about fair market value, right? That was a big definition. And if you really break it down, it makes a lot of sense, right? It sounds like a lot of words, but if you break it down into pieces, those are the things you might consider and act on if and when you are buying or selling a property, right? If you dig into that definition a little bit, and it kind of makes sense. What we need to understand when we do these sales is fair market value, and what represents fair market value might not be the answer we like, okay? Particularly in this market, you may say to me, Christy, it makes no sense that that property is selling for $600,000. Christy, that house isn't worth $600,000. The question is, does the market think it's worth $600,000? Will the typical market pay $600,000? So we don't necessarily have to like the answer, and I think in this market probably we don't, but it doesn't mean that it's not a valid sale representing our fair market value. So I think really understanding that differentiation might help you a little bit.
Absolutely. And we'll talk more as we go through the presentation of what you can do if you really don't think that those sales are fair market value. All right, Beth?
Yeah, so, you as listers and assessors are the closest thing to these sales as they come in the door. So you know your properties and so have the best first set of eyes. So we recommend that you use some method of sales tracking to review the data and identify the developing trends in your market or any subset thereof. So it's useful to identify that you have included all transfers that have been recorded with the town clerk and that all potentially valid sales have been included for the study. So Deanna or Christy, you want to say more to that?
Yeah, so for those towns that are not currently tracking your sales, there are some resources to help you to start doing this. Your CAMA providers, your CAMA programs have exports of the sales validity that you can ask your contractor to export for you and explain how to use. We also in the VTPI program have an export of all of the sales that were not previously excluded that are available. It's a pretty extensive spreadsheet. It contains every data point on the grand list and the PTTR. So if you want to go that route, I would definitely reach out to your DA to figure out which columns are necessary. Or my favorite is always reaching out to neighboring towns because networking is really going to be one of your best resources. We don't want to recreate the wheel here. It's a lot of work to do that. So try not to do that if at all possible. Anything else there, Christy?
Yeah, I would just reiterate that I think that we get caught up because I appreciate that everybody has so many things to do. You know, we're drowning in a world of emails and social media and so forth, and it's just a lot. It's all a lot, and I appreciate that. But if I were to say one of the most important things listers can do and assessors would be to keep track of their sales and to really hone in on what's a good sale and monitoring your market, because as we mentioned before, it really does have financial implications for the towns. And if that means that you have to go back to the select board and say, hey, you know what? I got to have a little more time because this is so important, then I think it's worth having that discussion and showing them why it's so important. And this is just a piece of it to kind of keep track of your own so that you can very easily check us, right? Is my report card thorough? Did property valuation include all the sales that I thought were valid, all the sales that came through, and did they disclude or not include all the ones I really had information about or thought were not valid sales, right? So
Yep.
it's important to spend that time and really dig into that and make sure that we have a really good inventory. We always say garbage in, garbage out, right? So good sales and full inventory is the goal.
Yeah. And again, good sales are not the ones that are close to your assessed value.
Right.
Just like the sale price is not always the sole is not the sole determining factor for fair market value. We have to be very careful when considering those two data points and not let them kind of cloud our vision there.
Do we want to see if there's any questions on fair market value while we're right here before we go further?
Absolutely.
don't-
Teresa or Jen, do we have any questions on fair market value?
I
I
just
have a
don't want
couple.
those questions to be lost in the trail here because we have so many people.
I think this is more of a question. This year's study will be used for the PVR ordering towns to reappraise last year. Do I remember that correctly?
So the results of January, right? The January results, which was the 2025 equalization study, will determine who gets a reappraisal order in the end of June.
Okay.
I don't know if
And
that, did I word that right based on the question? I was trying to figure out how that was worded.
I think so.
Okay.
The next one, says, just to clarify, the COD is no longer a trigger for reappraisal.
I believe this is the last year that it will be, but I'd have to check the legislation and then we're going to go to 6 years. I have to check on that date.
I'm pretty sure because 27 is the,
Yeah. I think that's correct. I believe
Okay.
in June of 2027, we'll be going to just the 6 year. So
Okay.
not to say that the COD doesn't matter, because as we mentioned, it's so, for me, it's almost more important, right? It is the measure of fairness. So it's vitally important. It's vitally important to taxpayers because it is the fairness measure. It may not trigger a reappraisal order because we will then revert to every 6 years, you're going to reappraise no matter what, right? But it's still really, really important.
Right.
Yep. Sorry for getting
There-
ahead of myself there, guys. Legislature is
okay.
moving fast and doing some fun things that make all of our lives super interesting lately.
Yep.
There's a bunch of kind of comments about, checking Zillow and realtor.com, and one person
Well-
indicated that they had found $400,000 in value on upgrades listed in MLS for sales that happened.
I
Do
think
either of
that's
you want to comment on that?
I think it's a good segue to what we're talking about right now.
Okay, good.
Great. So yes, do your market research. There are many sites that have been offered up here, and they can give great information. Deanna or Christy, do you want to speak more to that information and how to use it?
Christy, if you could speak to that, I got a little frog in my throat.
So there's a lot of different websites you can look at. We've mentioned some of them here. Some are better than others, right? Some are giving you estimates of value, which may or may not be accurate based on the information that they have. I think what's important for a lot of these is looking at the inventory, as some people have mentioned, right? Because what we're going to talk about is it's really important that we are looking at apples to apples, so to speak. So in other words, is what sold what was also assessed? And some of that can be gleaned through the descriptives and pictures in one of these sites, right? You're going to be able to look at pictures of properties that have sold or are for sale and determine whether or not your inventory is correct. And we're going to talk a lot more about exactly what that means and how detailed that gets. But that's one of the pieces that you can really use this for. It's also just great to get a feel and have your finger on the pulse of what's out there for sale. What has sold and I haven't seen it come through yet, right? Those kind of things. It's really good. Neighboring towns, what also has sold that I might be able to use for a comparable. All of these things are just kind of having an awareness of your market and what's affecting your market and what your market is doing. So in addition to that spreadsheet, if we can be checking a lot of these sites and looking for our towns, it's going to build that database in your mind, database in your files for what you have and what the market is doing.
Yeah, and I would put a plug in here that this is not just for the properties that have sold. It's not for the PTTRs that have just come across your desk. Especially if you're going to be taking that information into consideration and adjusting values for the ensuing year. I don't know that that's exactly what we would call or quantify as sales chasing, but it could certainly be interpreted that way. As listers and assessors, your job is to assess or estimate fair market value on April 1st of every year based on all information that is available to you. And things that you should reasonably know. So if you are out on the MLS or realtor.com or Zillow, I would be doing that on a frequent basis. Depending on how active your market is, that might be monthly, it might be quarterly. But most of the sales that come through to you should not be a surprise. Early on in the pandemic, things were, hitting the market and selling the same day. So that was shocking for all of us. But things have certainly slowed down in most markets across the state now. So if there's anything that I could encourage you to do to stay on top of inventory, especially in a reality where we're not doing it or getting interior inspections for a lot of properties anymore, I would make sure to be aware of everything that's on the market and review those on a regular basis.
So that said, Deanna, if you discover through reading an MLS that there is something that is not in your file, what would you do about that?
I would reach out to the property owner and ask to schedule an inspection or to have a conversation with them. you could certainly adjust value based on what you see and know to be true, right? We want to see and verify if it's not reasonable, because we know some of those listings are, just trying to hit the high points and, overstating value at the same time. The key here is to be consistent and to make sure that those change of appraisals are going out with accurate information and giving the taxpayer the opportunity to correct it if you have not been able to touch base with them before changing that value. Again, I would use that as the impetus to reach out and put them on an inspect list, first and foremost, and then, decide what the policy is in your office from there. Anything to add there, or correct, Christy?
No, I agree with you. And I think that, again, this is where we have to draw a line between physical differences that are not recognized and judgment calls that were made at the time of reappraisal. And what I mean by that is, I look at an MLS, for example, and I see that let's say that I don't have permitting, or the person didn't file a permit. And I see that they added a whole new 20 by 30 addition. I'm going to want to get that, and it is my job to get that for my listing purposes, right? No question. I don't think anybody would question that. That's a physical attribute of my inventory that I have not reflected. Okay. Now, conversely, what you're going to see is a lot of upgrades, right? They may have upgraded some carpeting, and they may have redone the windows and things like that. Those all have to do more with condition, right? Which is more subjective. And you may have a lot of properties out there that have done exactly that you don't know about. So those are more judgment calls, right? That go to a different level than true inventory that I need to reflect. And it's really, really a fine line. And I think we have to be super careful about that in regard to when it becomes sales chasing and when it digs into the fairness compared to others.
Yep. So a good point here is, if you are super new and you weren't involved in the last reappraisal, to kind of get that methodology down, take the notes down on the PTTR or in your spreadsheet, your tracking spreadsheet, to see if those things really did influence the value, and then have a conversation with your district advisor or your contractor. Do we have any questions on that? I think the chat's going kind of crazy there.
Yeah, we do. Let's see. Somebody commented, the house I bought a few years ago had the wrong information, said my house had 3 bathrooms and more square footage than it actually does. Just be careful with listings. One person asked if it was okay to take the square footage from like an MLS listing or a, Zillow, which I think you should be I don't agree that should be something you do.
No, I would never take that square footage, because they're likely including the basement square footage, just in the same way that they would include basement bedrooms, where in your evaluation software, you're likely capturing that as partition finish or some other basement finish that's not captured in the square footage.
I agree.
Yeah, you should be measuring. You should be going out and measuring.
Yeah.
Let's see.
And I would also add to that, 5 different appraisers can measure one building and come up with 5 different numbers. So yes. I wouldn't be adjusting yours based on someone else's measurement.
I have another question. I understand the information from websites, etc., but would like to hear your rationale for equitable treatment of all properties.
So I think this is speaking to, just because you can see it online, is that treating everyone fairly? And I would argue yes, in the same way that if you are a town that drives around all your roads every year, you're likely not seeing every property either, right? You're doing the best that you can with the information that you have. And once you know about it, then it is your responsibility to decide whether or not it impacts the value. Would you agree, Christy?
Yes. And again, a physical difference is different than what would have been judged as quality or condition at the time of reappraisal. And I think that's the kicker here.
Yeah.
If you're finding yourself trying to adjust based on pictures for quality and condition, then we might have a problem, because you're adjusting the judgment calls that were made at the time of reappraisal, which affects your entire model of your reappraisal. And that's precisely what we're trying to measure here.
Yeah, all good things to have a conversation with your contractor or your district advisor about before making those judgment calls, if you were not involved in that last reappraisal or things are just fuzzy because it was so long ago.
Yep.
I think that was really the gist. I don't believe there are many comments, but not questions, so to speak.
Sure, and we can certainly hang out after class if people have more, or in the break.
Oh, the question was really about quality and condition regarding equal treatment. That was from Lisa at Nemrick.
Got you. So quality and condition are two things that I would not typically touch between reappraisal unless you had a massive renovation.
Yep.
And you were, even if you had an addition that was equal to the square footage of the existing house, if it was just a living room that didn't include a bathroom or a kitchen, those high price items, that might also not change my opinion of condition or quality. So when you run into those things, it's, again, you want to talk to your DA and you want to talk to your contractors.
Okay, I think that, let me just double check one more time. Yeah, that was all I see.
All right, Beth, we're back to you.
Okay, great. So you are expected to do research when necessary, when you're tracking down, looking at these sales, and document, because you're being paid $1 per active grand list parcel to work on this. Please provide the documentation that that you have encountered. So Christy or Deanna, you want to speak more to documenting?
Sorry, the audio cut out there for a moment. Did you cover the $1 per parcel?
Yes.
I ever
did.
so briefly.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So again, Christy did mention we are very, very conscious of the fact that legislature is asking all of us to do a lot more with each ensuing year. This is one aspect of the job that legislature once upon a time felt was extremely important, and as do we. So they're allotting the town $1 per active parcel to help compensate the town for your time and potential postage for your own sales verification letters. It's not $1 per sale, or PTTR, it's $1 per parcel. We know in smaller towns that probably doesn't cover the cost to do this, but that's a good faith effort, and another reason that we expect some good follow through on these.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit more about a sales verification letter, but I think it's a really good practice to get into, because what we want to be doing is verifying whether or not a sale is a valid transaction. And so we cue it to certain questions that will help kind of pull that information out from buyers and sellers. Right? By asking certain questions, we might be able to glean information that might lead us to say, well, that affected the sale negatively, so perhaps this isn't a fair market value transaction. And that's the kind of stuff we want to be able to get to, right? We may not have all the information just based on the PTTR. Someone in the town might not know information about that sale. We can't find anything more on MLS, but it just doesn't feel right. So that's where we've got to dig a little further, and that might include a phone call to the realtor. It might include a phone call to the buyer or seller, and it might include developing a sales verification letter strategy where your town does it automatically on sales to try to get that. Yes, it is an added cost, but when we talk about, financial impact, it might be worth it at the end of the day.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get to that sales verification letter in just a moment.
So all this is to determine if the sale is an arm's length transaction.
Correct.
Defined by the International Association of Assessing Officials as a sale between a willing buyer and a willing seller that are unrelated parties, each of whom is reasonably knowledgeable about market conditions and under no undue pressure to buy or sell. And that will really become much more clear as we go through the circumstances. But please say more, Deanna.
Sure. And I think
Or
arm's
Christy.
length transaction is probably the biggest point that we need your help with. We do not know everybody in your town as well as you do. And certainly as, you know, properties have transferred so frequently in the past 4 or 5 years, we don't at the local level know all of our property owners as well as we do, or as we used to. But the local officials are the ones that have that historical knowledge of the property, the abutters, the family relations, the really close friendships. And they also have that firsthand knowledge of those title searchers and other folks that are coming in and out of their office that are dropping little nuggets. So those are all things that it's really important to take note of. And if you feel like they have impacted the sale, then we want you to provide that to us in the comments for each of the sales. And we'll go through that demo towards the end of class. Anything else there, Christy?
I think the keywords you said is, did it affect the sale, right?
Right.
So if you were to say to me, Deanna sold to Christy, and I know that they knew each other 10 years ago, my question back to you would be, well, did one give the other a deal because of that relationship? So it's not always just a one answer question, right? It's, did they know each other? What was the relationship? And did it affect the sales price in a way that it would not affected another buyer or seller? So we have to dig into all of those pieces, right? If we get some impetus to say, I got to dig further, then I'm going to dig further and say, okay, we know there was a relationship there. What's the relationship and what's the effect on the sale price and the value of the property?
Yeah, and that arm's length transaction can go either way. They might cut a deal, they might charge them double.
Yep.
So that more frequently happens with abutting parcels that are not valid for other reasons. But it could just be that they really want that particular piece of property. So definitely something to be conscientious of.
So now I think we bring in the term invalid sales, which we will definitely need documentation for. So what do we mean by
I think
invalid?
you might be a little bit ahead of us.
Well, all right. I will stick absolutely to the script. We may request backup documentation before removing many of the invalid sales. Your statement that a sale is not valid does not mean we will automatically remove the sale from the study. So, gosh, I'm sorry, my update. So this is in my document. This is C, not E. So things have changed. So provide documentation. Anybody want to say anything more to that?
If you believe that you have a piece of information, an MLS listing, a sales verification letter, a deed that lists some information that we might, maybe an inventory of some personal property that was attached to all things that we'll talk about as we go through the verification codes. It's in your best interest to save that in the attachment feature that we'll show you during the demo. Because as much as we want to, and the district advisors do touch every sale, we don't know them as well as you do. And if you really feel that there is a piece of information that quantifies its validity or its invalidity, we want you to provide that to us so that we can best capture that information. If you don't, and it's questionable on our end, that's a large reason why some of the towns get sales back and they see that we've removed or added sales back in, contrary to your opinion. Anything to add there, Christy?
I think I would just add, we talked about letters, but also just kind of using your resources. Does, for example, the town clerk have better information because they know a lot of people, right? Have those conversations with the people that are in the know about these sales and document. If you make a phone call, write it down, the date you talked to somebody, who you talked to, and what you found out. That might end up being your documentation at the end of the day.
Yep, definitely.
Great. So here are those things to know regarding sales review. So this, if you don't, so we do send out the sales verification letters. You guys can do that. I'm going to leave this to you, Deanna and Christy, to follow along as you are.
Okay, so we had mentioned that sales verification letter. We do encourage towns to send out their own verification letters as close to the time of the transaction as reasonably possible, because particularly for those sellers who may be moving out of the area, those forwarding orders from the Postal Service sometimes only last 6 months unless they're re-upped. So the towns have a better chance of getting a response for those sales that might seem a little bit questionable. If you don't say that you've sent a sales verification letter or attach it in the sale, then we may end up duplicating that effort. So there's just another plug there that if you send them, please let us know. Something as simple as sales verification received indicates valid sale. And if we have a reason to reach out and ask for a copy of that, if you haven't attached it, we can do that. We definitely don't, we get a lot of feedback from taxpayers saying that they've already filled out letters for the town. So that's just another way that we can keep our taxpayers a little bit less disgruntled if we can coordinate our efforts there. And certainly if you don't get one of your sales verification letters back, we're happy to send one on our end. Maybe the mean big blue meanie at the state can get a response. Anything to add there, Christy?
Yep. So we'll show you in the program towards the end here where you can actually ask us to send a letter and how you can do that. And then it will come from us if you can't get a response on your own, or if it's a sale you really don't have a lot of information about, we're happy to send that out. I would just caution, please don't click that request for a letter on every single one, because then it's time and money on our end that we don't particularly have the resources to spend, so to speak. So, you know, use it wisely. We want to verify sales. We want to help you to get good information, and we need to use it for the ones that really need to be searched out a little bit further.
Yep. Absolutely. And I'll go ahead and show the sales verification letter that you can also find on page 4 of your document. This is a sample that we've provided, and you can certainly tailor these questions to what is relevant for your town. If you have a lake or you have a lot of condos, you might have some other questions that you might want to be asking here. So this is not a format that we require you to use. It does loosely reflect what the sales verification letter from the state says. We don't need to go through each of these points because we will cover them throughout the discussion of the special circumstance codes. But is there anything else you want to plug here about the sales verification letter directly from the town, Christy?
So if you choose to develop your own letter, really look at these questions, because as you know, with all questions to the public, it depends how you word it, right? And you may not get the answer you want based on how you word the question. So we've got to be really specific about what we're asking and how we're asking it. And I would really kind of just defer you to look at these as examples of the good kind of questions that might dig into all of those pieces. And then the other thing I would add, you know, it's a great project for a new lister to be in charge of this. It helps them to learn and to start to suss out those details. And it could be a project for a new lister. You're in charge of sending out the sales verification letters. You could include a welcome letter to your town. You know, this is the resources of our town. This is where the rec department is. This is the town office numbers. This is the listers numbers, et cetera, some sort of warm fuzzy that helps kind of pave the way for new buyers, for example. It's always good to include a self-addressed stamped envelope. I know that's a cost for the town, but again, we're going back to cost versus benefit, right? Are we getting out of it and the financial impact of this whole project? So I think it's worth, the juice is worth the squeeze, so to speak. I think you'll get out of it what you put in, and I think it's really might be worthwhile just to make the study better and make your results better.
That's a new analogy I don't think I've heard you make in all of the years we've been teaching together. I love it. But it looks like the chat is going a little nuts. probably with some, advice and some back and forth, but are there any questions there, Teresa or Jen?
Let's see. There was a comment. Our town clerk says she gets about 50% returned mail on the welcome to town letters. So we haven't been doing the sending new sales letters.
Welcome to town letters are an incredible resource, particularly as we have folks from out of the town or the state of Vermont moving into the state of Vermont, because we do things a little special here, right? Everything's done at the local level, and outside of New England, and not even all New England states do things at such a local level. So it's something when I was a town clerk back in the day, I wanted to implement. Honestly, don't remember if we ended up making that happen or not, because it's been quite a few years now. But certain things like select board meetings and resources, and how to sign up for a library membership when your town offices are open, how to get a hold of the road crew, particularly if you live on a fun back road during mud season. But if you have one of those already happening in your town, speak with your town clerk and see if you can piggyback on that, and that might help get some more response. Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
And as
And if
far
you
as
don't have one,
as far as the return mail, I mean, I think in some ways that may help you suss out some better mailing addresses, which is also a benefit to the town, right? If you get a return with a forward address, then it helps you to get better information for your grand list and so forth as far as a good address for that person.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
that actually people are saying 50% is great.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, if you get 50% response, that's a great response rate. I certainly would not mail sales verification letters to every sale, right? Because we
Right.
have a lot of transfers that come in that are trusts or to family members, things that you already know to be invalid. If it's something that we might question, you might want to send it out just in case, or you might want to find some other way to prove to us, that there was, some connection or some influence there for that particular sale. I would say on average, on our end of things, we're probably sending them for at least 10% of the sales, on top of what you have already done. And for me, with some of my markets, I send them for up to 30 or 40%, depending on the investment that the town seem to have made into the answers that they've given me. So figure out what works for you, what your litmus test is going to be for sending those out. I'm a strong advocate for policies, and having a meeting when you sign, who's the chair and your hours, that type of thing, setting some policy and how you're going to do some things, because it just creates some consistency for your office and those who come after you.
I'm not seeing a lot of other questions. I think we had a question on some outliers, but I think we'll get more into outliers in a little bit. Is that correct, Deanna?
Yep.
And let me just see. I had a question from Beth Dolly. Is this form meant for buyers and sellers? Question 12 is strictly a buyer question.
Right. Again, this is just an example and something that you can work from. You can tailor these questions if you want to have two separate letters. Some towns don't want the complexity of managing two different letters and making sure they go to the same or to the right person. So whatever works best for you is what I would advise.
I think that's all I had at this point.
Okay. Anything else, Christy, before we move on?
Nope, I'm good.
All right, we're about 5 to 10 minutes from our first break, so.
Okay. Listed value at time of sale. Where do we find that? How do we use it? What does that look like?
So listed value at the time of sale is the point of comparison that we are going to be using for all sales, except for in a reappraisal year. Don't want to bog down the conversation with reappraisal year. We'll have a separate training for reappraisal sales when the time is appropriate. A lot of times, we'll get responses from listers saying that they identified new inventory or had to update some things in the new listed value for their ensuing grand list year. So in this case, 2026, they might superimpose that at on the listed value at time of sale. That is not something that we should be doing, because that's not a fair measure of the listed value in your 2025 grand list. It's definitely something that we want to be aware of, and we want to know what changed on the property for you to come up with that new value, but that's something you should be putting in the comments for us to consider. Anything else there, Christy?
Yeah, so I think what we're talking about here is apples to apples, right? We want to judge where you were at in your grand list at the time that property sold, and are those two things the same? Okay, so did what sold look like what was listed in the grand list at the time? If so, then we want to compare those two things. And we'll talk about where that might not be the case, but if you're not a reappraisal town, we're always going to be looking at the listed value that was in place at the time the property sold.
Yep. The other point to be aware of here, you have about 3 months out of the year where you have sales coming in to the town office for recording, and you don't yet have a lodged grand list for them to reflect the new value. So at the time of recording, your town clerk may have had to use the prior year's grand list value, right, from April 2nd or April 1st until the date you lodge, which could be as late as June 4th or even later if you get an extension. That period of time, it's really imperative that you take a look and make sure that the listed value is reflective of the grand list year that we're talking about. So for April 1st of 2025 all the way through March 31st of 2026, those are the values that we're looking for in this year's grant, or this year's study.
Yep.
And just to add, the ATS there is something that you'll see in VT Pi, and you'll see that page on VT Pi later, and the ATS to pay attention to.
Yeah,
At
we will
time of
definitely.
sale. Yep.
Pardon me?
At time of sale is what ATS
Right.
stands for. Yep.
Okay. Comments in VT Pi. Okay, when completing the validation of sales in VT Pi, word your comments succinctly to correspond with the reason, the special circumstance code, which we'll talk about in a minute, for removing that sale. Do you want to say more to that?
We like concise comments, because again, we touch every single sale. For me, I have 42 towns right now, so you can imagine that equals a lot of sales, and for the folks who have the cities like Burlington and South Burlington, that can be painstaking. So make sure that your comments are relevant to the validity of the sale, not a novel about the family history or the property history. If it's relevant, we want to know. And that could be true whether it's valid or invalid. We do say further in the document that valid sales require little to no comments. But if the value looks weird, or there's something that you think we might question on our end, and you know it to be a valid sale, we want you to make sure to put a comment in there to support your opinion of validity. Anything else there, Christy?
Yeah, just in terms of a lot of wording, my concern, because we are looking through so many sales, is if there's something important and you wrote 3 paragraphs, we may miss the important part because you wrote 3 paragraphs. And that's why we want to keep it concise, right? Put the information that we absolutely need to know in order to consider whether or not we're invalidating the sale or keeping it valid, and really put that foremost, and keep it short, because we want to really focus on that, and we don't want to lose it in the chaos. And as you know, if you write too much, people can't take the time to read every single piece.
So just to be a little clarifying, I'm thinking about new listers. So the process looks like you look at your sales, and they're released into VT Pi, and you're making comments and applying special circumstance codes, letting us know how you view that sale, whether it's valid or invalid. And then we, as district advisors, look at that again. So each of those sales is then reviewed again and may come up with a different reason. So I don't know why I feel compelled to say that clearly, but
no, I think that's great. No, I think that's great. And it's actually 3 times because, right, the town's going to
Right.
say what they think about each sale, give it to the district advisor. District advisor will say, oh, this makes sense. They've provided the information or they haven't, right? And may change some things. And then it comes to me as the supervisor. So there's 3 looks at that one sale in order to make determinations. And so the clearer we can be across all of those pieces, the better our information and the better our study is going to be.
I'm
think
noticing
that's a
some
great point.
comments about number of characters. As the self-proclaimed wordiest district advisor that has probably ever been at PVR, I have yet to meet my character limit on the comment section of sales verification, or yeah, the comments and sales verification. There is a very small limit on lister responses. I think that's capped at 60. We've been trying to get that increased, and I think Taxpayer Services is on board with that in the coming years. But if you do really feel compelled to give us more information and you find that you're hitting a character limit in BTPI, call your district advisor and have a conversation about whether or not it's really information that you should be including, just to kind of have that litmus test again. But I haven't experienced that character limit. Not encouraging you to try to find it though.
Right.
Okay, grievance values. We do not accept grievance value changes as a reason to invalidate a sale, nor do we reduce the listed value at time of sale to reflect the result of grievance. Deanna, Christy?
I'll let Christy take this one.
So you might say, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why don't you? Again, we're back to this is your report card, so to speak. We want to know exactly what it was at the time, reflective of how those listed values operate compared to fair market value. So by grievance, we're talking about a way that it could be adjusted for whatever reason. So that's not a true reflection of that apples to apples if the grievance pieces get involved, right? If the grievance leads you to something that says our data is totally inaccurate, right? Because we had a garage that's not there, for example, then we can have a conversation about whether it's apples to apples, but it's not a case of us accepting the grievance values. At that point, it would be a case of, okay, then as a result, is it not a valid sale? Right? And we might ask you more questions about that, but we won't take the grievance values or BCA values, right? You wouldn't want us to take those because that's not your product. That's not the result of your product. So we want a clean apples to apples listed value at time of sale. Does it reflect what's sold?
Yep, and we'll talk more about large change post-assessment for things that happen to the property after April 1st, but before a sale. But I think this is a good place to put a little plug in that grievance values and changes at the time of sale, they are not considered because it's an opportunity to change the way you're looking at a property compared to how you're looking at the rest of the properties in town. So we want to be equitable, right? This is judging the health and the equity of your grand list. And that is not to say entirely that your CLA or your COD is a poor reflection on you. It's a reflection on how the property was assessed at the time of reappraisal and how that is holding up to the market today. But it is also imperative that you update your inventory with annual permits and other means like the MLS to inform that inspection list so that you get ahead of them and we're not having this particular conversation. Anything else there, Christy?
Nope. I think that was a great point.
Okay, mobile home parks. All sales to or from mobile home park owners are removed under Special Circumstance Code 19.
Yep. And if you think about that, there is a contractual relationship with those mobile home park owners and the people who own the mobile homes. So there's already an existing relationship there that may have impacted the sale. So to be equitable, we are not considering any of those to be valid in the study. Anything else there, Christy?
I just want to make sure people are understanding that correctly because there was some confusion in the past. Mobile home sales could be good. This is specifically sales to the park owner. When a mobile home is located within a mobile home park and the owner of that mobile home park either buys or sells that unit. Those sales are the ones we want to exclude. And we may not know about that because they're in so many different ownership types and names. We may not recognize that this is a mobile home park owner, right? If it says mobile home park LLC, blah, 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 we might pick up on it, but it may be in an individual name, maybe in a corporate name that we don't recognize. So we rely on you to provide that information for us. And as Deanna said, that's a contractual relationship. Oftentimes there's financing involved. There may be some other implication that we're not aware of, back rent and things like that. So we just want to get those out of the study if they're to or from the mobile home park owner.
All right, we'll do one more and then we'll take a break before we start talking about the circumstance codes.
Great. Relocation company sales. Businesses hire relocation companies to buy or sell real estate when employees relocate as a benefit to the employee. The relocation company typically buys the property and resells it. Their intentions and incentives are not necessarily market-driven. Therefore, we eliminate these sales from the study.
Yep, and this is another one that we're going to need your help with. This is not something that's always obvious based on the name of that entity, but that's really all I have to say there, Christy.
Yeah, there, I would just throw out that there are circumstances that we disqualify a sale that you may not for your own purposes. Okay. You may say, I don't agree with PVR and I want to use this for the purposes of my ongoing study and reappraisal. That's fine. We have certain parameters that we will not include sales because we have to make a measure statewide. So this might be one of those circumstances that on that resale, you may say, I want to include it for my purposes. We don't, and we disqualify both of them. So just throwing that out there.
No, I like that. Any questions before we take a probably 10-minute break?
Let's see here. Somewhat of a new lister here. So if I understand, all sales will show up in VT and we'll have to comment there if it is a valid sale to be counted in the equalization study or not.
That is not correct. So there are a series of codes, and we'll talk about that probably on the first slide when we come back, or second slide when we come back, that are automatically excluded. If there are $0 sales, so typically those are to trusts that are, to the same family, or somebody putting their property into a trust, or to their children, there may be a $0 value in the sale price. Those are automatically excluded. Most timeshares are also excluded as category 4. So if you happen to be in a town that has a lot of timeshares and those ski resort towns, and you see some come through, you would or use a code 4 that we'll talk about. But yeah, there are some things that will not come through. So that's why earlier on in the conversation, Christy said that you want to make sure that all of the sales that are showing in your VT Pi queue to be verified are reflective of all of the sales that you believe to be valid. If there are any missing, you want to let us know, because that may have been pre-excluded in error based on a code that was entered on the PTTR by the attorney.
Yep.
It happens quite frequently, actually.
When we show VT Pi later, we can just touch quickly on how to run that report and look at that.
Yep.
So that everybody understands how to utilize what you're talking about right now.
Yep. And VT Pi does.
Sorry, I was just going to say that I think that if you're a new lister, once you see the VT Pi screen where you're looking at the sales summary, that things will make a lot more sense.
Yep.
Yep. And VTPI does also provide a pre-excluded sales report so that you could easily look through those. I prefer to have a stack of PTTRs next to me as I'm validating sales, or at least I did when I was at the town level. That way it's very obvious right there in front of me if something's missing.
Can I ask for clarification on valid versus invalid sales?
Sure. What's the question?
Oh, just, like, what makes one valid? What do we do with it? What makes one invalid, which I think we'll get into in great depth in a minute. And then what do we do with it?
Yeah, so there was a comment in the chat that I queued on that I just wanted to clarify for folks. So when we say valid sale, that means those are the sales that we think we or you think represent fair market value. So those are good fair market arm's length transactions. That's what we mean by valid. Those you would look through, make a comment if necessary, but you may not even need to, and you would move along in the process. Those do not need a special circumstance code, which is what we're going to talk about next. The properties that would need a special circumstance code are those that you think do not represent fair market value for some reason, which we're going to go through, or it is not an apples to apples representation from the sales price to the listed value at time of sale. And those would need a special circumstance code for us to consider whether or not we will make them invalid sales, which would not be included in the study.
Absolutely. Good point. I did have a town or two that thought that they had to put a circumstance code in for every sale. So all of their valid sales came in as code 19 for other, which, as you can imagine, created a lot of confusion on our end. So to start the conversation out here with valid sales, sales that you believe to be valid for purposes of this equalization study. As Christy mentioned, you may choose to consider a sale valid for your internal purposes, and particularly during the time of reappraisal, the concept of valid changes a little bit. But there should never be a circumstance code on a valid sale, because that will exclude it from the study and cause confusion on our end. Anything else there, Christy?
I think we got it, unless that's prompting questions.
I'm not seeing any.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure our terminology was clear as far as valid versus invalid, and I do see a hand going up.
Oh, how do I unmute? Allow my, okay.
I don't know, I'm trying. Ron Wells, did you mean to have your hand up? And Jen, are we able to unmute him if that's the case?
She had to take a phone call, Christy.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe Ron could type his question in the chat and we can come back.
He should be able to unmute himself now and speak.
All right, it looks like we're having some conversation in the chat about what constitute a valid sale, and we promise we will get to all of those questions with the circumstance codes as they come up.
Yep. Try not to get ahead of us, folks, so we can make it clear to everybody. Go ahead.
Well, great. So jump in, guys. And actually, I think this is really the fun part. I really love the special circumstance codes and, teasing apart what makes a sale invalid. So go for it.
Go. Oh, I thought
Sorry,
you were
go
telling
ahead.
Sorry, Deanna, can you say more about invalid sales?
Yeah, sure. So we'll start out by, we're going to talk about each of the circumstance codes that are available to you and the district advisors to quantify whether or not a sale is invalid. Okay, so now we are putting out of our minds the discussion of the valid sales and what might be considered valid. We're going to talk about what is specifically invalid and how to code those. As we mentioned before, you will not see all of your sales in your queue in the VTPI program because the program, once those sales have come over from the My VTax program into VTPI, there are circumstances on that PTTR that may tell the system that it is invalid. And again, this is coming from PTTR data. For those of you that have been doing this for a while or have some clerk experience, you are aware that PTTRs are probably a 50-50 shot as to whether or not every data point on them is correct. So this is why we also encourage you to review either the pre-excluded sales report that we will show you during the demo, or to have that stack of PTTRs next to you so that if there is a sale that was inadvertently excluded, you can touch base with your DA and get that sale added back. The most common thing that you might see slip through for those valid or those invalid sales, again, in those resort towns, might be timeshares. Anything else there, Christy?
Nope, I think you got it.
All right. So sales that are between family members. Some of those are really obvious. They might have the same last name. I would caution you though, if the same last name is Smith, as I found out 2 years ago, even though they were both Smiths from the same town, they had no familial relation. They just happened to both live in that town at that time, which was confirmed by a sales verification letter that the town initiated. So that was a great catch. Those sales are never going to be included, but we also need for you to tell us what the relationship is. On the PTTR itself, there is a finite relationship or range of relationships that would exclude that sale from owing transfer tax. So we can't rely on that specifically or entirely. So if you know that it is a cousin relationship or an aunt uncle relationship that would still have possibly been subject to that transfer tax, we need for you to tell us what that relationship is. Anything else there, Christy?
Yeah, I think I would just caution about how far removed it is, right? If it's my if it's my fourth cousin via marriage or something like that, I may not know them well enough to cut them any break whatsoever. So it may be a situation where it's still a valid sale, right? So it's always the question of what's the circumstance, and then did the circumstance change it from what anyone else would have paid in the market, right? So there's our qualifiers.
Yeah, and this is particularly important where the last names are not the same. So in this example, the wording example, we said buyer's wife is niece of seller's. So that niece may have a different last name than the seller.
Yeah. And if you're not sure, that's when you send a verification form, right? Two last names are the same. You can't find out any information. You think it's a little wonky in terms of sale price. So there's probably something going on there, but you don't know exactly what it is. That's when a verification form would come in handy.
Yeah. And if you're following along, we're now on page 7, actually at the bottom of page 7. So corporation and stockholder, one misconception that we see a lot, particularly from newer listers, is any sale to or from a corporation or stockholder. The misconception there is that automatically makes it invalid. But what we're talking about here is when a stockholder is putting their property into a corporation or taking it out. Also, if there are two companies, two LLCs, or two corporations, we need to know whether or not they have interested parties. So we recommend that you review those agents on the Secretary of State's Corporations Division. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that, Christy?
Right. So the situation we're talking about here is, for example, John Adams is the A in ABC Corporation, right? And John Adams sells his portion to the rest of the shareholders for ABC Corporation. Obviously, that's not going to be a fair market value transaction. So those are the kind of things we want to know about.
So when you're on the Secretary of State's website, where do you see that information?
So when you pull up by name a business name, which we've shown you on the top of page 8, how you can do a business search, and then you can look specifically for, once you click into that entity, you can look and see who the principals are and who the managing agent is and so forth. And so sometimes it'll give you like those primary people that are involved in the corporation. Not always, but it's a good check. So if you don't get an answer there and you still think something's going on, then we're back to either phone calls or the verification form.
Yep. Any questions on that, Teresa or Jen?
Let's see. We have a lot of properties that have not been visited in over 18 years. The sale price is way above listed value because inside renovations were done.
Yep, so that's what we call the aging of a grand list. And that's precisely what we're trying to measure with the equalization study. And what you're going to see, and you should see, is that your CLA is dropping precipitously because the market has gone up. And we don't like the answer, right? But it doesn't mean it's not the right answer. And it
Right.
likely is. If you're 18 years out of a reappraisal, you're probably at 30 or 40%. And that's probably a correct measurement based on the way things are selling now. There's not a whole lot you can do about that except to look towards reappraisal. And that's part of why the legislature has implemented going forward that 6-year cycle so that we don't get in a situation of towns being 18 years out with poor inventory and so forth. There's no way you can keep up with the market if you're 18 years out.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is, go ahead.
I was just going to add there, certainly not with an 18-year-old reappraisal, but say you're 5 to 10 years out of reappraisal. If you don't have zoning in your town and you think that there is a lot of stuff happening inside properties, you might consider something like a cyclical inspection. So you decide that you're going to do 1/4 of the improved properties or 1/3 of the improved properties every year. You do that on a rolling permit instead of your permit list, right? You do that as your inspection list just to try and keep that inventory current. So there are different ways to do it. The important thing here, and we'll talk about it more in depth, is that when it says last assessment, that is the April 1st of that year. It is not the last time it was visited. So for things like large change post-assessment, if you didn't make an attempt to visit a property in 18 years, and then you found out that they built 3 garages and a barn, that's still talking about the quality and the condition of your inventory. So we'll talk about that more in a little bit.
Okay, what if it is a broker selling their property? We have a realtor that buys and sells their property quite often. They move in and fix it up and then sell it. Is this a valid sale?
I'll let you take that one, Christy.
I think in most cases, probably, because the broker knows full well what that property will sell for, and they're going to get the most out of the market that they can by marketing it accordingly. Right? Now, you talked about 2 different things. You talked about they buy it, right? And then they fix it up a little and sell it. So are both sales valid? Maybe, maybe not, right? What were the conditions of the first sale when the broker bought it? Did anybody else know about that property? Did the buyer just go to the seller and say, hey, I'll buy it before you put it on the market? There might be things like that going on. But very likely that second sale where that broker is marketing it, they know full well what they can and should get out of the market. And it's likely that that one at least is fair market value for me.
Yep. And we'll talk about the timing of those improvements when we talk about some of these other codes.
Linda Sherman commented that that's why we're moving to conducting reappraisals every 6 years.
Yep.
Someone said, can you restate when a cooperation sale is valid?
So, let's take my example, right? ABC Corporation sells to John Smith. ABC just happens to own a warehouse in your town, right? And they sell to John Smith. John Smith has nothing to do with ABC Corporation. It was on the market, could very well be a valid sale, right? Conversely, in my example, when John Adams was part of ABC and he was part of that sale, that's a different thing, right? But if it's just a corporation buying or selling to an individual person or entity that has no relation to each other, then it's probably a good sale.
Okay. Are all LLCs on state website?
They are. And if they are not on the Vermont state website, then look to the state that shows in their mailing address, and you can likely find them by doing an LLC search for that state. And you can also find them for Canada, for those northern towns.
Okay. What about new buildings being built that we have to assess now and the CAMA files still have the same values in them?
I'm going to hold that one until we get to code 21 because that's going to be a big discussion.
Okay. Let's remember that one then.
Mm-hmm.
Is there ever a question of sale price being invalid because it's too high? Think COVID-driven sales.
Just on its face, just you saying the sale price is too high is not a reason to invalidate a sale. So there's the first part of the answer. The second part of the answer is, does that high sale price give you an impetus to dig further and see if there are other reasons or things that went into the sale? The answer is probably yes, right? If I think that it's too high and I want to dig further and find out if there are reasons why, then that's what I should do. But just saying it's too high isn't an answer, right?
Right.
Right. Because we have to remember, we're talking about willing buyer, willing seller. Were they both informed parties? And was there anything that impacted that sale? If you think back to early COVID, there were a lot of people from other parts of the country that were selling their much more expensive properties and coming in with cash in hand, which made them a little bit more likely to buy something maybe sight unseen because they needed a place to move to during a pandemic. But that does not mean that they weren't willing buyers and willing sellers and that they were not informed about what they were buying. So that's why a lot of those sales, you notice that you may have marked them as invalid, but they came back in as valid because we just didn't have a tangible reason to remove them from the study.
Are you requiring the LLC lookup under the corporate/stockholder circumstance?
So we don't require it. It is part of the digging that we're asking you to do, right? As part of that $1 per parcel, that investment in your own CLA and COD and having a good product, right? Garbage in, garbage out, as Christy said. If you have looked that up, you would put that in the comments saying no relationship between LLC and buyer or seller. And it's something that we will likely look up on our end as well. Anything to add there, Christy?
If you're making the argument, right, that John Adams is part of ABC,
right,
then we would want to know how you know that. Okay, or we would want to know how we could verify that. And if you're not sure, the only way you can verify that is we're giving you a resource to figure that out.
Right. So if you know that another way, then we wouldn't require you to go into the SOS site to get that information.
Yep.
Okay. If the town is aware that a property renter is the buyer of the same rental property, can that invalidate the sale?
We'll get into that one under code 19.
Okay, let's see. We're a ski town and vast majority of our second homes are deeded in an LLC for tax purposes, not necessarily a legit business entity. I think we see that frequently.
We do see that pretty frequently, and I would say do the best that you can. If you believe that there was a relationship between the LLC and the buyer, or the seller, if you can't figure it out, or you really can't find that quantifiable reason to invalidate the sale, trigger a state sales verification letter or send your own. Reach out to the realtor or the attorney that was involved in the sale. Those are some other resources that are available to you.
Right, and reminder, just because it's owned in an LLC doesn't mean it's not a valid sale.
Correct.
We're just, right?
Right,
It would only be if the parties were related in some way.
So willing seller, willing buyer is what we are basing valid sales on, not property value.
I would argue that we never base our opinion of validity on value, right? Because we don't know what we should know or have some idea what the market is allowing. But at the end of the day, we're not comparing it just to our assessed value or the sale price, whether or not we think it's good. We're looking at all the other bits and pieces that would inform us whether or not that sale price was impacted by anything that was unusual or not apples to apples.
Yep,
You
and
wanna
I
say
would,
that in a different way, Christy?
well, I would trigger the person back to fair market value definition. Is it within the definition of fair market value? Is it what a typical buyer in my market would pay? Right? If it's way outside, then you got to dig a little bit further. But if it's still willing buyer, willing seller, what is it telling you about your market and what's happening in your market? We don't like the answer always, but it doesn't mean that the answer is not correct.
Right.
Which is a little bit more
I see at the moment.
Yeah. Up until 2020, that was a much different conversation, right? We didn't
Yeah.
see that as often. But we've all been a little traumatized, I think, over the last 5 years, of seeing those sale prices that really just make us scratch our heads, and we got to dig in a little bit more. And I would argue that it's even more important to continue doing that now, especially since we've personally seen that change in market that hasn't been seen probably since 2008, which was quite a while ago now.
Yep.
All right, Christy, you want to talk about number 10?
So again, this is a special circumstance code number 10, and this one is dealing with properties that were sold at auction or foreclosure. The bank took possession of the property and resold it. There was some liquidation involved in the sale, tax sale of properties, sheriff's sale of the deed, things like that. So if you just say that straight out to us, it's a number 10. It's a foreclosure, and there's nothing clear to us to show that, then we might need more information. So oftentimes what will happen is in a foreclosure situation, the bank is kind of the intermediary person. So we wouldn't know without you telling us that it was in fact a foreclosure sale, because we don't see that intermediary transaction on our end always. So there's those kind of things that happen. An auction, we might not know by the name, right? There are certain names of auction companies that we might not recognize. You could Google it and see if it was an auction property. Sometimes it's clear by the name. Those kind of things are what we're looking for here. If, for example, a person had to liquidate all of their property because they had to go into a nursing home, for example, that might be a situation where you need more information. You need a letter, or you need more information to indicate that that's what happened.
Yep, and I would put in a plug here that this is a really good reason to be very familiar with not only your town's delinquent tax list that's usually published annually in your annual report for some towns, if not certainly available from the delinquent tax collector or town clerk, but also to be very familiar with the recordings that are happening in your land records that are not simply PTTRs and deeds. If there is a foreclosure, there are multiple complaints of foreclosure that are recorded in the town records that would give you an idea that, hey, there's something up with this property and this property owner is probably distressed. Similar to things like wastewater permits to know if somebody's intending to build on a property, things that are important for you to know as listers and assessors, but that are not specifically deed or PTTR related. I'd get those books out of the vault or ask for access to digital copies of the land records so that you can make sure you're as up to date with those as you are the MLS listings. And then we have a couple of wording suggestions for you that are also available in your document on page 8. Liquidation or short sale, seller was under financial duress and could not afford to keep the property. Delinquent tax report for the past 2 years is available. Auction sale, copy of auction notice available for viewing if you don't want to go ahead and scan and attach that right off the bat. Sorry about that. Bank foreclosure per deed or CPTTR wording. Any other questions on foreclosures, Teresa?
Is there a separate code for a distressed sale? Owners are underwater, but not in foreclosure?
I would try to use code 10 in that instance, but I would want something very tangible, verifiable from the property owners to substantiate that, right? We don't always know what's going on in someone's house and what their finances are. Certainly if they've been seeking abatement for a few years or something like that, that would be an indicator, or if they were on the delinquent tax list. Anything else you have there, Christy?
Yeah, we would need something. So maybe that's where you get a letter or you get some sort of other information that you can.
Let's see. Does this include a property that was owned by an insurance company / bank, but they sold it on MLS in the open market?
So that's actually a really good example of a post foreclosure sale that may be valid, right? Just because it's to or from a bank doesn't automatically make it invalid. It's a good indicator, but it's something that requires a little bit more digging. Would you agree, Christy?
Yeah, typically we will remove bank sales, but if you believe it's a fair market sale, we might consider that.
For an auction sale, would a URL to the auction page work?
Yes.
Absolutely.
I'm just looking to see because some of them are not about this
Yeah.
particular one. MLS can help with that if it shows a short sale in the listing for distress, but not in foreclosure and underwater.
Yep.
That was a comment.
Absolutely. Yep.
If you suspect that it's a short sale, you can put that in the comment. If you don't have access to the MLS, your district advisor may have the time to look that up for you when we review the sales.
This one, this person just said, what if a person puts his home into an LLC? I mean, that doesn't negate a sale or invalidate a sale, right, Christy?
Well, are they talking about that transaction itself where the person is putting it from their individual name into an LLC? Because a PTTR would come through for that. If that's what they're talking about, then that would be invalid, but it probably would be pre-excluded because there wouldn't be a sale price, right? So we probably wouldn't even see that. But if they then turn around and sell it, there's nothing to say that's not valid.
Right. Just because it was put into an LLC's name.
Right.
Tim Denny would like to know, please define what a short sale is.
Basically, it's a financing mechanism where you're selling it out from under so that you don't become foreclosed on.
And you're selling it for a lot less.
Typically, yes.
That's the
caveat
there. But that everybody has agreed on it that they'll allow it in lieu of going the foreclosure route.
Right.
Right. So in that case, it's an informed buyer, informed seller, but it's distressed.
Correct. Okay, I think that's it. Oh, wait. Oh, yeah, he was just explaining a short sale, so I think we're good.
Okay. So estate sales. Sales by and to guardians, trustees, executors, and administrators should often but not always be labeled as invalid. If you're not sure, send out your sales verification letters or request that we send those. Right. So there is a very significant misconception that anything that is from an estate is an invalid sale because the person has passed away. And I think that once upon a time that was probably true. But we're finding that the majority of these sales are actually ending up on the MLS, on the open market. So unless there is some other indicator of distress that they had to sell because someone passed away or they sold it for less than maybe fair market value because they just needed to offload the property to settle expenses or something like that, then that estate sale is likely going to be valid. Anything to add there, Christy?
Yeah, same idea. I think the wording here talks about trustees. So the problem we had last year was some towns just automatically disqualified sales that were to or from a trust, which isn't the case, right? So again, it's just an indicator that maybe there's something else going on with that sale for you to dig further. You see sold from a state of John Smith, right? Does that automatically mean that it's not a good sale? No. But do I need to dig further and see if it is? Sure. Okay. So is it a reasonable sales price? Was it on the market? That kind of thing. Not an automatic, just a possibility that could be there.
Yep. And one key phrase to keep in mind as you're looking at these sales, particularly for estate sales, if it says being sold as is, that likely means that it's not going to qualify for financing and maybe has a lot of personal items left in the house that are going to go with that sale. They just need to offload it quickly. So that might be an indicator that it would not be a valid sale. Government, so code number 12 in the special circumstance list is pretty straightforward. It's sales to or from the US government, state of Vermont, or any political subdivision of Vermont. Those will not be included in the equalization study. That also includes school districts, because that seems to be a topic that's been a hot one for the past decade or so. So sales to or from a school district, that's also considered a subdivision of Vermont, a municipality. Anything to add there, Christy?
As is sheriff departments. We had some of those too.
Oh, okay. Did not see those.
Yep.
All right. Do you want to talk about charity, religious, and benevolent, Christy?
Sure. So again, this is a tickler file for you to say maybe it's not a valid sale if it was sold to or from a charitable, religious, or benevolent entity. It's not an automatic. So, for example, sometimes a church will sell a property and it may be a valid sale. Okay. Sometimes a nonprofit agency will buy or sell, and there could be a gift involved or not. But it's not an automatic just based on the name of the entity or their 501(c) status. Okay. It's just a call out for you to say, do I need to do more research? And does this or does it not represent fair market value? Were there other things involved that affected the sale price?
That's usually one that gets some questions. Do we have anything in the chat?
Well, I have one that says town-owned property.
Town-owned property is a government sale. So number 12.
Yes.
Yep.
That's a subdivision of the state of Vermont.
Does this mean that any sale that doesn't qualify for bank financing is automatically invalid?
No.
No. No, that was just one of the pieces of the pie, right? One of the things to consider in those estate sales.
That's all I have.
Yep. A lot of times you'll see as is when people need to offload the property quickly. You might also see the words motivated seller or drastic price reduction, something to indicate that there was some extreme motivation on the part of the seller to offload that property. Those are just keywords to clue into.
I think the kicker here is, but for a couple of these codes, none of them are absolutes. They are just triggers to say these are possible reasons, and then I need to figure out whether or not it represents fair market value from there.
We have another question actually. Doesn't qualify or doesn't utilize?
Neither. That again, that's just something that the words as is might indicate that the property will not qualify for financing.
Mm-hmm.
These are all kind of crumbs that you're picking up to determine whether or not you think this is a valid sale. Dropping the price drastically is another question that I saw in the chat. That might be an indicator that it is a motivated buyer. They really just need to get rid of the property, whether it's because they're sick of Vermont winters and want to move south or somewhere else, or there's some real financial implication that they need to offload that property. Might also be considered as a number 10 for that liquidation. Again, keywords to pay attention to that might trigger you to send a sales verification letter to know exactly what that motivation was.
It might also just be a case of they started way too high just for the heck of it, right? Throw out a number. So it might not really mean much at the end of the day. They were just testing the market.
Yep.
Now they're getting back to reality. That could be the case.
That could definitely be the case. All right, unusual financing. This one's my favorite. So sales where financing is significantly affected by or affecting the sale price. Cash financing or owner financing may not necessarily invalidate a sale. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about financing, owner financing, where the terms of that contract are significantly different than what you would expect if you were to go to a bank for a mortgage. So things like balloon payments after 5 years that the seller is expecting you to pay off the balance, that's not typical. 0% interest is not typical in this market. 20% interest is not typical in this market. And anything outside of the 15 to 30 year range for your period of repayment is not typical if you're going to the bank. Those are the things that I would look for. Another thing here, somebody mentioned in the chat, renters. So if you send a sales verification letter and or can otherwise prove that the property was being rented and some or all of that rent was being applied to the eventual mortgage, that may or may not be owner financed, those would be unusual financing issues. Anything to add there, Christy?
Yeah, I think I would cue in on the renter/tenant piece because we had a ton of those last year where folks would just put in tenant. Well, for me, that's not enough because my question is, one, did the tenant pay fair market value? Okay. And two, were there any other extenuating circumstances, as you mentioned, special financing because it was a tenant, rent went towards the purchase price? It's not an automatic to say this person was a tenant of the property, so therefore it's not a valid sale. Not enough. It could very well be, especially in this market.
Yep. So this is another reason to pay close attention to your land records because typically the next document after your deed and PTTR in the land records is going to be a mortgage. And if it is owner financed, that will be very, very obvious and a reason for you to send out or reach out for those terms. The fact that it's owner financed does not mean that it's invalid. It's those terms that are going to be the qualifier.
And I would just, as part of this, I would just caution you That's part of what we review. So just because you say something is invalid doesn't mean that we're going to accept it as such. So that's kind of the play back and forth where you're wanting to get that documentation.
Yep, definitely. And give us something a little bit more tangible than owner financed.
Right.
Give us the term, give us the rate, give us anything else that you know about that contract that would invalidate the sale if you truly believe it is not an arm's length transaction. So some wording examples: 100% seller financing at 20% for 45 years per town sales verification letter. That's another point that I did not mention. 100% financing is also not typical. All right, we would expect to see, if you're going to a bank, somewhere between 10 and 20% down. And then we also have the 1031 exchange investment property swap. So why is this unusual financing, Christy?
Again, it's a financing exchange mechanism where you're basically trading in your rights to a property to receive another equal type property. So it doesn't really fit the definition of fair market value in that it's not a straight up marketed property. It's an exchange. So they'll often put that right on the PTTR that it's 1031 exchange. So if you see that you would cue into that. You might get some other indication that it is, or you might have a question and you would ask and get that kind of information.
Absolutely. Any more questions on unusual financing, Teresa?
Well, this isn't. Do rental payments applied to the ultimate purchase price have an impact on the sales tax due? Is the seller hunting or hurting themselves if they admit that arrangement existed?
I think that is a really loaded question that has more to do with income tax and
Yes.
transfer tax liability that is outside of the scope of the lister's office.
Yep.
Yeah, so we'll just leave it at that.
Deb Kingsbury said VA is 100%, and there are 3 to 5 programs as well.
Okay, so you're probably talking about the FDA or the FHA loans that are available to people, and you're correct. So there are certain types of financing that would finance at 100%. It's just another qualifier to keep in mind.
Right. If it's seller financing at 100%, that's more questionable than bank financing where they might be a first-time home buyer and they got to go through a whole bunch of proof of income and all of that to do that. So that's kind of what we're queuing into. Did the seller finance it at 100%? That's not typical.
Right. Partial interest. So this is not the same thing as a subdivision. Partial interest relates to the ownership and legal rights of the property. So what we mean here is if you're adding or removing a seller, an owner from the property. So whether that be due to marriage or a divorce, or large co-ownerships like ski clubs or camps where you have more than one owner and they're buying into or selling their interest to the remaining owners. Anything there, Christy?
Yep. So for example, if Deanna and I owned a property together and I said, Deanna, I want out, I'm going to sell my 50% to you. That's a partial interest. It would be recorded as such, should show on the property transfer as such as a partial interest. And we would disallow that because consequently she would not be paying me full price for my 50%. It's only a portion of the ownership that she's receiving.
Yeah, typically you'll see these come through with almost an exact 50% sale price to the listed value, because they're probably not going to be paying for an appraisal on these sales, or at least not often. Or you'll see them come through with a zero or very low dollar value.
Yep.
Any questions on this one, Teresa?
No, not really, but it's hard because this, Yes, there's no questions. I think I'll answer this on my own.
Okay, sounds good. Property assessed in more than one town. The wording example here is sale includes 50 acres in the name of the abutting town. So why are these sales not valid? And the simple answer is because you don't value the entire property on your grand list. So you have no way to know whether or not that sale price is reflective of fair market value for the entirety. Anything to add there, Christy?
Yep, again, it's just apples to apples, right? You only have a portion of the apple that's being sold. The whole apple is actually being sold, and part of that happens to be in another town. So it's not apples to apples. And we wouldn't want to compare that because it wouldn't be fair.
Excessive personal property. This one usually takes us a little while to talk about. So if you're following along in your document, we're on page 10. So excessive personal property requires significant documentation, such as amounts stated on a PTTR, amounts in a deed, an inventory in a deed, and almost always followed up with a sales verification or some other statement from the property owners, both the buyer and the seller, of the value of that inventory. Do you want to expand on that, Christy?
Yeah, so this one gets really tricky because, for starters, if you are transferring personal property by statute, you should be declaring it on the property transfer. So we have to start there and say it's already suspect if it's not on the transfer. Okay, if it's on the transfer, we will automatically adjust for it and it's a done deal. Okay, if it's not on the transfer and you think there's a bunch of personal property, then we've got to know what it is and whether or not it's typical for the market. Okay, is it excessive? Okay, we're talking big percentage, big dollar figures, and is it typical for the market? So if somebody transacts the kitchen, refrigerator, and stove, and washer and dryer, that's pretty darn typical. That's what you see in the market. We're not going to adjust for that. We're not even going to talk about it. Okay. But if they say, as part of this sale, the buyer received the pontoon boat, then we might kind of say, oh, wait a minute here. That might have significant value. Or all personal property, including antique paintings within the property and all furniture, et cetera, right? Then we might question. And so what we're looking for here is an attestation by buyer and seller, hopefully both, to say what it was and what it was worth. And oftentimes we'll run into a situation where the seller will say it's worth $30,000 and the buyer will say it's worth $500,000. So we've got a problem here, and we have to kind of ferret that out and see if we can get the real information as to whether or not it was worth quite a bit of money and whether or not it in fact affected the sales price. That's always our default situation. Is it an effect on the sales price?
Yeah. And in your document, you'll notice that we did identify a couple of percentages that we use as a rule of thumb. And certainly there would be exceptions, but for a residential property, we would consider excessive personal property as a reason to invalidate the entire sale, not make an adjustment if it was more than 10%. So as Christy mentioned, those lakefront properties that might have a really extensive dock with a lift system and a boat, or a series of, really expensive kayaks or paddle boards, those types of things, depending on the value of the property that is assessed, right? Because those things aren't something that you value in your grand list. If it reasonably equals more than 10% of the overall sale price, then that might be a reason for us to invalidate the sale. Similarly, with commercial properties, we would expect something more than 25% to be excessive. The other part of the conversation here is we could still consider sales with personal property valid, and we might be able to make an adjustment for the value of that personal property if it wasn't already claimed on the PTTR, if we have two pieces of information that agree. So if both the buyer and seller agree that it was $5,000 of personal property for, you know, the kayaks and the pontoon boat, then that's something that we can adjust the sale price for, and that sale would still remain valid. So a couple of different things to keep in mind there. Anything else there, Christy?
I think just if you have any questions, you can talk to us about it, right?
Yep, absolutely. And we talked about timeshares in ski towns earlier. So condos are expected to sell furnished. So when you see something that says fully furnished and it's a condo, and it's otherwise an arm's length transaction, that is how the market expects them to sell. Does that mean that you assess that list? That's a conversation to be had with whomever did your last reappraisal. And certainly whoever is going to do your next reappraisal. Typically, the personal property is not valued, but condos sell differently than typical residential properties.
I have one question.
Okay.
How would you determine the value if the sale included a garage with a few classic cars as part of the sale? And if over 10% of the total sale, that it would then be invalid?
I think the first place that I would go is the Kelly Blue Book value for that antique car or that classic car. But I would always follow up with sales verification or some other statement from the buyer and seller. Anything else there, Christy?
I mean, I think there are a few cues here. They're saying a few classic cars, right? And in our verification letter, hopefully we would have their estimate of what those were worth. So it's already indicating to me that we might have some problems here if it included those things. So if I can't get my fingers on the pulse of what they were worth, then I'd probably eliminate the sale altogether because I don't know the effect on the sale price.
Okay, that's all.
Oops, I'm going backwards. Sorry, guys. All right, so subdivision, unlike partial interest, is the sale of property conveying only a portion of the assessed unit will be excluded because the total listed value will not match the portion that is sold. So the most obvious and most frequent that we see here in subdivision is where you have a 25-acre parcel and they chop off 10 acres and sell that to an unrelated party, right? So because your 2025 grand list did not have that 10 acres valued and taxable in that grand list, that is considered a subdivision. It didn't have a value at time of sale. It has to be considered invalid for purposes of the equalization study, with the exception of reappraisal years, but you know, we're not going to confuse the conversation at this point. It could also be something like a mobile home. If somebody sold a mobile home that was on a property, but didn't sell the land underneath, that might be considered a subdivision. Anything else there, Christy? Sorry, I'm getting hoarse.
So again, if you're thinking about that apples to apples, right? If my grand list at the time of sale represented 100 acres and the sale is for 10 acres, I don't want to compare the 10-acre sale price to my 100-acre sale price. And that's what would happen. So therefore, it's not apples to apples, and we want to exclude the sale from the study.
Yep. With the new technology that we have in the VT-PI program, because we are linking your new 2026 grand lists when we get to your first CAMA upload, there is the ability for you to attach that new span number and show us what the new value is. We do not want you to confuse that ability with the fact that this property is a valid sale, or this transaction is valid or invalid. If you are not a reappraisal town, every subdivision that occurs between April 1st and March 31st of the preceding year is going to be invalid. We suggest wording that example is purchased 10 acres out of 50 acres with the new span. We only need to have the last 5, and the new listed value in a new category. This is extremely important because we have the contiguous or parcel feature, which inactivates your parcel. So you may very well have a value and a span number for that property already at the time of recording. But if it was not taxable in that grand list, it was not a valid sale. It would not have a listed value at time of sale or ATS. And similarly, we have more robust communities where after their zoning permits are approved for subdivisions, those listers or assessors might create those new spans and make them inactive for the pending sale. Again, those were not taxable in the prior year's grand list, so they are invalid sales and considered subdivisions. So something to be very, very careful about, because we want to make sure that every town is being treated fairly and equitably, and that anything that is truly a subdivision is not counted outside of a reappraisal year. You want to clarify that at all, Christy?
Nope, I
Sometimes I'm
think you
confusing.
you
Okay.
did great.
Thanks. All right. Any questions on subdivisions?
If the subdivision is done before the April 1st deadline and then sold by a realtor, would this be valid?
So if the subdivision is done before April 1st,
And then sold by a realtor, would it be valid? I'm assuming in that
The-
same
the-
year.
If it's before April 1, right, the realtor piece doesn't matter, because the point of the matter is your listed value is more acreage than what's sold. So it's not apples to apples.
Right. I think that's it.
all right. Other, this is our fun catch-all category. This category should be used for atypical situations or where none of the other categories are appropriate. And we definitely require written explanation for these sales, and often some backup information. So what things could possibly qualify as other? Had to relocate quickly. So cases where that seller had to sell quickly to move into a nursing home, which could also be a liquidation, couldn't take care of the property, couldn't afford the property, all need supporting documentation. Where we see this most often outside of liquidation is for job changes. In my territory up on the Canadian border, I have a lot of transactions for Border Patrol agents that are moving to and from the area to different places in the United States. So in those cases, they had to offload those properties quickly or buy them quickly. Anything else there for relocation, Christy?
No, I don't think so.
So a quick little wording example: town SVL or sales verification letter from seller's son states that he could no longer keep the property up and sold at a loss in order to move into a nursing home. Seller was in her 90s. Again, these speak more to that liquidation, code number 10, but they would fit under 19 as well. Close friends with no marketing. It's another type of sale that would go under 19. We definitely need some details here, right? So there's no familial relationship here. But again, if their relationship impacted the sale price of that property, then it might be a reason that we consider it an invalid sale. Anything to add there, Christy?
I think that last piece is super important. Just because someone is friends, are they good friends? Are they friends that are close enough that they'll give each other a deal? That's a wide range, right? Deanna's my friend. It doesn't mean that I'm going to sell to her my property for less money than what I could get on the open market. So
Gee,
that's sorry. So you really got to be careful. You can't just put in the word they're friends, right? Or they're acquaintances, or they're, they knew each other. Doesn't matter. I need more than that, right? They knew each other, and therefore they gave the seller gave the buyer 100% financing at 0%, right? Something like that. Okay, well then they really were friends, or they gave them a deal and it's a lot less than what it would sell at for because they're close friends.
Yeah. Boundary line adjustments. So this might just be that maybe your neighbor needed a new wastewater system and they were encroaching on your boundary. So you decided to swap some acres with them. sales involving a deferral of permit, and those 1031 exchanges that we talked about in unusual financing. A couple of other things that I've seen, for some reason, I don't know if it's special or significant to my territory up here in the Northeast Kingdom, or if other DAs see this as well. But sometimes the buyer has some motivation to buy the property or come back to the area because that's where they grew up or that's where their family owned. Those are things that you're not going to get answers to unless you send a sales verification letter. Typically, you would see that happen when the sale price is much higher than the listed value and it's not really reflective of what's happening in your market. But just another thing that you might see come through on one of those sales verification letters. And then other situations that do not meet one of these criteria. So certainly we can't touch on them all, and new situations arise every day. Whether or not we would agree that it impacted the sale price is another question. So we just want to be concise and informative in your comments.
So I'm going to give a couple of examples where we would say needs more information. If you put in the comments, if you put code at 19 and put in the comments too high, right? That's not good enough. We need more than that. If you put in the comments sold to someone from out of state, not good enough, right? Doesn't mean it's not fair market value. Those are the kind of things we might not like the answer, but it doesn't make the sale an invalid sale.
Yep. And we're not done yet, folks. We still have a couple codes left to go.
I have a question on
Okay.
close friends. Close friends, sale was listed for 1 day, sold the same day for a price we don't believe reflected the market. Does the fact that it was listed for 1 day indicate that it was on the open market?
Maybe.
And I think I'm assuming because he put close friends.
Right. So some of my favorite sales verification letters to get back are when we're told that they are close friends, and then the buyer says they were and the seller says they weren't. And I'm
Yeah.
sure somebody's feelings would be hurt there. So again, it's just another piece of the pie that we want to know about. Did it actually impact the sale price, whether or not they were friends or not? So if somebody does say that they were close friends, take it with a grain of salt. It's another indicator.
I think that was it. Yeah, that was it.
Abutter sales. So sale where the buyer already owns a parcel next to the sale property. That one's pretty straightforward. A wording example is the buyer already owns span in the last 5 digits are sufficient. And if you feel like it's going to be a complex issue, maybe you could take a snip of your map, or we certainly have access to click on the span number and view the VTPI parcel viewer as well. Where this can be a little bit confusing, or not sure what word I'm trying to use here, but it might be that they own a property that's one parcel over. They don't actually touch, but there was a reasonable assumption that their proximity to the property either motivated them to buy it or gave them some type of unfair advantage in purchasing that property. Typically with these sales, we don't see them hit the open market. Anything to add there, Christy?
Yeah, and this is another situation where you might include that sale, but we would not. So for your purposes, you might say, well, it was on the market. It was, so what if it was next door? They marketed it and so forth. We have to draw a line in the sand for everybody throughout the state, so we would still kick it out because we presume there is probably a higher indication that it might be not representative. Either they paid too much for protection or they paid too little because they got a deal. So we just draw a line in the sand and say abutter sales are out for our purposes. Your purposes might be a different answer.
Another thing that I see quite frequently is it might not be that they own the property next door, but it might be their parents. So they grew up in this community, and they really had a vested interest in getting that property, or were able to talk their neighbor into some type of a deal, or reduced price. So it might be a family sale for the abutting property owner.
Yep. And again, that's the buyer that's abutting, right?
Correct.
The
The
buyer
buyer.
has an interest.
Yep.
So they're somewhere nearby, and they might have information or want that property more than another typical person.
Yeah. It could also be that there is an LLC that owns the abutting property owner, and they're purchasing that abutting property in their own name. That would also be a reason to make that invalid.
Yep.
Do we have any questions on abutters, Teresa?
Not a butters, but a general PTTR question.
Okay.
There are several parts of the PTTR that help a lister know what a transaction is about, like relationship of owner and buyer, use of property before sale, use of property after sale, etc. Why aren't all of these questions required to be answered on the PTTR before filing it?
The simple answer to that is we can't force the attorneys to be complete in their filings. And it's also not the town clerk's job to make sure that they answered them all or answered them correctly, right? So that PTTR is simply a tax return to make sure that the state of Vermont receives the appropriate transfer tax. We are basically piggybacking on that form and using it to help us inform the sales study. And as I said earlier, in my experience, I would say 50% of the PTTRs that came through my office had at least one, if not multiple errors on them, which is unfortunate. The only way to change that is to lobby legislature to make them do it correctly. And we'll leave that there.
The last question is, we had to buy a business sell for a large amount of money. The buyer said it was because it was an operating business. Is that a valid sale?
Perhaps not. The question there would be, did the buyer purchase the business name and the operating business as part of it? And that could therefore affect the sales price, right? They're buying an existing business, which is an added value to the property, perhaps. So that one might need a little more digging, but it's potential that it could not be a valid sale.
Right. And in that instance, they'd likely be buying inventory and all the personal property within that property as well. So other things to capture.
That's all that I have.
Okay. All right. Large change post-assessment, my second most favorite. So this is for when someone has made an improvement or has taken down a building, or a building has burned between April 1st of the preceding, or between the April 1st preceding the sale and the actual sale date. So you might remember that I said the date of assessment is April 1st of every year. It's not the last time you set foot on the property 18 years ago. Okay. So we want to make sure that we are very, very careful when trying to make an argument for a large change post-assessment. If we're not keeping up our inventories, it's going to be less likely that this will be a good reason to invalidate a property. So some of the examples that we have are these sales will only be considered invalid if their value changed in the next grand list year. Right. So when you do that first CAMA upload for 2026, we're going to see whether or not that value has changed. We also encourage you to put that change in the comment with the reason for that change. So some wording examples are: the purchase price included 1,000 square foot addition added before the sale, but after April 1st. Right. So that's something that you didn't have the opportunity to capture in your grand list. So, and it increased the value by over 10%. We'll say 10% as the rule of thumb for this example. That would be a reason to make this property or this sale invalid. Or property at the time of sale was listed as 70% complete, but it's sold 100% complete. This is the new listed value. So the key again is it something that happened between April 1st and the sale? So say a property sold in September and over the summer they built a brand new garage. That's not an apples to apples comparison of what you had in your grand list on April 1st. And it's a significant value in most cases. So we would invalidate that or that sale. Anything to add there, Christy?
So this goes back to that subjective versus objective information. So when we talk about this 21, we want something we can actually see in that apples to apples comparison is not the same thing. This doesn't include things that I would consider to be subjective information that was a judgment call at time of reappraisal. An example of that would be quality, condition, land grading perhaps, right? Things like that that were judgment calls set up at the time of reappraisal that are not simply things that I did not reflect in my listed value. It's a different thing. So we're going to be really specific with you about, you put down a code 21, I need to know what it is specifically. What was it that changed? I may say to you, I need a new listed card so I can see that you added it the subsequent year, right? Not just that you went in and changed the quality because you thought that the sale price was higher. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for things that actually don't match when we look at the two. If you were looking at the two pictures, so to speak, or apples to apples of those two things, why are they not the same? Can I see it? Can I judge it? Can I reflect it objectively?
Yeah. So Christy, would you change the value on a property because they got a fresh paint job right before the sale?
No.
That's one I see quite often.
And I certainly wouldn't accept it as a 21.
No.
Right?
And I hope you wouldn't, yeah, definitely hope you would not be changing the value based on a paint job.
Right.
If you've taken our data quality or data collection class, you would know that paint is not one of the things that speaks to quality or condition.
Right.
It may help preserve the condition of the property, but it's not something that is actually valued in your CAMA program. And that is the end of this segment. What do we have for questions, Teresa?
Let's see. We've had a couple of questions about short sales, and typically short sales are not going to be valid. But I had a person ask, since the lender uses excessive due diligence to prove the sale price meets its fiduciary duties, what would that point to a stronger indicator of a valid sale, even when it's distressed? And I had commented that, if it's a short sale, it's not a valid sale. There are too many things that go on behind the scenes that you don't see.
Agreed. Agreed.
So it would not be a valid sale.
I think it's just one of those places again where we have to draw the line in the sand.
Yeah.
And also, when you're talking about fiduciary duty, they're making sure that their business, the bank, is not losing money. So
Right.
even though they might lose a little bit of money, and might not be able to recoup in a short sale the full amount that is owed on that mortgage and any other fees or penalties that have accrued, that's their fiduciary duty. It's not their fiduciary duty to get fair market value.
No, and I can tell you, as a previous banker, it's basically the bank looking at it and saying, okay, we're going to agree to this because it's better than nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate it for lack of a better explanation. So let's see. Stacy Bradley said, I recommend viewing the long form version of PTTRs where you might have questions. These can be viewed on my tax, VTax, and have a little bit more info. And I agree that you can certainly do that. And sometimes it does provide additional info. Other times it's missing information. Do I understand you to say that if a buyer purchases a property because it may be close to a family property, this is treated like an invalid abutter sale?
Maybe.
It could be.
Maybe.
could be, but I would really argue that it would have to be, the sale price would have to, there would have to be many questions because that's not just an indicator of an abutter. If that person buying does not live there, even if mom and dad do,
Yeah.
maybe, but I would suspect
So-
you'd need to provide more.
So like so many other things, it depends, right? Might be a tickler for you to ask more questions, but it's not an absolute.
Yep.
Right.
That sales verification letter might come back and say, mom and dad are aging and I needed to move closer to them to take care of them.
Mhm.
Or it might be, Mr. and Mr. Smith were my godparents or something to that effect. They live next door and they're cutting me a deal on the sale price.
Mhm.
Something like that. Again, we need the details and we might not always agree, but if you believe a sale price is not reflective of fair market value, then we need those details.
Let's see. New windows, new heating, cooling would change energy factor and possibly depreciation factors, same as a new roof. I would be very careful with that.
Mhm.
So it certainly would, right? But we have to look back to your last reappraisal. Are those things that were taken into consideration? How far removed are you from your reappraisal? Can you call your reappraisal contractor and ask them if they took those things into consideration and how would they manage it? It is not something as a lister or even an assessor that doesn't have extensive reappraisal knowledge that I would encourage you to make that change. I would note it in the CAMA notes so that your reappraisal contractor can review it. But yeah, I would not change value solely on that information without some expertise.
Another question. So extensive renovation inside since last reappraisal would invalidate a sale?
Depends. A lot of these things really depend, right? If we're just talking about maintenance or we're talking about wallpapering and painting, then no, right? If we're talking about tearing it down to the studs and then adding another addition and all new heating system and a new kitchen and 2 new bath, then it's a different thing, right? Is it in fact different than what was listed? Not just subjectively. Right? The wallpaper and the paint is subjective things. The tearing it down to the studs and starting over is not so much subjective, right? So that's where we get into really, we'll say to you, what was it? Well, what did they do? You tell me what they did and what was the change, what was the therefore change in value?
Okay.
And if you
how
don't
do
have
we-
the contractor resource, then you should at least be reaching out to your DA.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, how do we view neighboring towns' equalization studies?
We'll show you where you can access them.
Is a sale valid if renovations were extensive and different from how it was valued in our CAMA?
Well, I
I'm
don't think we would qualify that with how it was valued in your CAMA. If there are extensive changes and they were after April 1st, so you didn't have the opportunity to value them or make the changes in your CAMA, then it would just be invalid. You would have to tell us what changed, though.
Right.
We have someone asking if we can post the link for the long form of the SVL.
I don't think it was a long form of an SVL. It was a long form of a property transfer return.
Okay, I was wondering about that.
And it's an option when you look up property transfer returns in VTax, which is where your clerk would also access the transfer returns. So if you're not accessing them there, you might want to sit with your clerk and learn how to access them that way. But it's just an option when you view a transfer return.
Okay, are taxpayers legally required to return SVLs? What happens if we don't get them returned to us?
No, they are not legally required. What happens?
that's-
You don't get the information that you might need, and you either try to get it another way. You ask us to send the form, because sometimes if it comes from the tax department, they might answer. Not always. Could go either way. Or you ask more questions to someone else that might have information, but we're doing the best we can.
Right.
Yep. In those cases, I would always reach out to the attorney or the realtor to see, what were the extenuating circumstances of the transaction.
Okay, well, this should only take about 2.5 hours, so should be. Oh, wait, no, we have 12 minutes. Okay, we'll keep it to 12 minutes. Fine. All right, so we're going to do a quick walkthrough of what all this looks like in the application. So all I've done thus far is logged in. This is our test server, so nothing I do is real. So all this is in the equalization study module, which you may have noticed you do not have right now. But you will shortly. So if I go into the equalization study module, I've got two options here. Zoom in, sure. So looking at sales validation here, a couple things to highlight. First one's the breadcrumb trail. This is the easiest way to get back where you came from. If you want to go all the way back up to the home screen, you can click on that. You'll find with all these screens, it's going to default you to unverified. So this is your work queue. You can also look at verified to see what you've already done. And you'll notice this release button here. This is what sends it to the state. So once you're done with sales, and you can do this incrementally, you can release them to the state so that they can begin their process. If you find that you've done that too early, you can ask your DA to send them back to you so you can take another look. That can either be one sale or all of the sales, depending. So I'm going to go back to unverified here. We do have a couple of reports here. This is probably the biggest one, the sales summary. So this is just a listing of all of the sales that you have and all the verification information in Excel. We also have too small to follow. Can other people see this? How big do I need to go here? Okay, I'm going to leave it there. So you should also take a look at your pre-excluded sales, particularly if you're a small jurisdiction, which doesn't have a ton of sales. You can take a peek in pre-excluded and see if there's anything that you might be able to use. Another thing to highlight here is all of these searches are dynamic. So if you're looking for a particular deed and you know the buyer or the seller or the document number, even the sale price of the span, you can just type that in right here. And it's going to start filtering down by that column. So pretty easy to get what you're looking for. Watch out, this sticks though. So you're going to want to remove this when you're done. Otherwise, you're only going to be looking at Kevin's. And if there are no Kevin's left, you won't get anything in this table. So just be mindful of that. So I'm just going to click on a sale here. To orient you to the screen a little bit, this is the information here. Okay. I'm closing the chat. We'll do chat at the end. So this is the information here from the property transfer tax return. You'll notice it'll show you more buyers and sellers if you hover over here. So this is really good information to start with. You've got the mailing address of both parties. That's a decent indication if they're related, if they're sending their stuff to the same place, and then what they're reporting as the property address here. Down here, we've got the property that was linked. By default, in this case, it doesn't look like it's necessarily correct here because my situs address isn't matching the property address, so we would change that. So that's a good thing to keep an eye on. Deanna mentioned viewing the map. This is how you view the map. You just click on this and it's going to zoom to that span that you have selected. So this is all from your grand list. This is from your CAMA upload that you do. And then on the right-hand side here, you've got your verification. So first column here is the information that came in on the PTTR. Next column is the default values that you start with. So by default, you agree with the PTTR's sale price. And you'll notice here it's highlighting this because our current grand list value and the value that we've selected for the property are way different, right? So at 300,000, 145, pretty safe to conclude this is not the correct property. So we would relink that one accordingly, and we'll take a look at that in just a minute. The column that you're not seeing here is the state column. So we have what came in on the PTTR, what you as the listers say, and then the final column, what the state says. By default, you and the state agree with each other. So only if they've overridden something would these be different.
Hey,
So
Pat,
just going, yeah.
I just wanted to say we did start, 15 minutes later, so because people were having trouble getting in. So unless you have to be out of here at noon, you do have some wiggle room. I just wanted to let you know.
Okay, appreciate that. So we've got the property tab here. So this is showing us the properties that are attached to the record. In this case, we would just remove this property and add a new property to it. You can also add multiple properties. So you can select multiples if it was a multi-parcel sale. It's just going to add everything for you. We have the attachments tab here. So this is where you can put your own sales validation letters. This is where you can also put things to justify why you don't want this sale to be included in the ratio study. So for example, if on April 1st, you assessed a property that did not have a garage and the property that sold in October did have a garage, you might just put the building permit here and just say, added garage, not valid sale, and use the appropriate code for the property that sold was not the property that you assessed. Questions will happen a little bit later in the year. If your DA has questions about particular sales, they will send those off to you and you'll be able to answer them in message board style format. But that will be starting later, certainly once we get past April. The other thing that we have here is sending a sales verification letter. So you can actually make the state send out a sales verification letter on your behalf. These go out on Tuesday. So if you do click it accidentally or you decide that you don't want it to be sent out, you can actually undo that up until it actually gets sent. Verifying your sale here. So just clicking verify. This pops up and you can edit any of these values that you need to. Most commonly, you're probably going to be editing your total sale price. If you're somebody that's undergoing a reappraisal, you do not need to change all of these values. We can do it automatically. So you'll want to talk to your DA about that, and we might have a special training just on that. So these can be updated automatically. Again, if you're doing a reappraisal, you don't need to update all of these. We can do it automatically for you. I know there was some discussion about personal property. This is where you would note the personal property if there were any concessions or if you wanted to modify the acreage that was sold. Then we have our special circumstances codes here, and some of these will ask you they'll force you to put in more information, I should say. So for example, if we say it's a family sale, it's going to want to know the relationship of the grantor and the grantee. So you'll have to put something down here to explain that if you want to use that code. If you don't want to exclude it, just select nothing in the dropdown. You can add your comments right here. Those will be saved with the sale. And now you do have the option if you just want to save this, if you're not done, if you don't want to verify it, you don't want it to go out of your queue, but you've kind of done some pre-work on it. You might just notice that I've done pre-work and not actually verify it. So we'll go over here to the next sale. And again, you can use these to navigate back and forth. So in this case, we can go into verify. Maybe this one's fine. And then we'll go to the next sale and verify that one. And again, this is basically the process using the guidance that you just got from the DAs. This is where you input all of the information, so you can verify that. You can also submit sales individually to the state. So if you know you're done with this, there's nothing else that's going to come to light. It's either in or out. You can send just this sale off to the state, which I think they would appreciate it if you were sending sales over earlier, just so that they could get a jump start on reviewing them and have a little more time to get that process rolling. But that's more or less it. You just go through, look at your information. You've got your PTTR. You've got the information from the linked grand list record, and then our three versions of truth, so to speak. What they said on the PTTR, what you as the lister say, which again matches the PTTR by default, except for the listed values. The listed values are from whatever grand list record you have. So in this case, it looks like on the PTTR, they put down the right information. So these two do match exactly. If these don't match, you'll definitely want to take a look and see, did they maybe not put down the correct listed value on the PTTR, or is this not the right property?
Pat, can I have you click on the verify button?
Sure.
So during our discussion earlier, I mentioned that period of time between April 1st and when you lodge your grand list in the vault so that the clerk can put the new listed value on the PTTRs. They may have had to use a prior year value if that had changed, right? So if say that 1,123,300 was now $900,000 in your grand list, in your 2025 grand list, then you would change that dollar number there. And in the comments, you would tell us why that number had changed. And if that made it an invalid sale in your opinion, then you would choose the special circumstance code that was associated with that. Okay. Another thing here that we want to make sure that you're checking is the category code. If you can, for anybody who wants to stay on the call after 12 or when we wrap up here, Christy is willing to stay on and show you why the category is so important in your equalization study. And essentially, we want like properties to be compared to like properties, right? We want it to be an apples to apples comparison. So if the PTTR inadvertently said an R1 and it had 10 acres, it should be an R2. And we want to make sure that it's captured in the right category. Similarly, if it was accidentally put in as miscellaneous, which is just your raw land, and it had a house on it, we want to make sure that it has one of those residential codes. Anything else, Christy or Jen, that we think we wanted to clue in on here?
Not at the
That
moment.
was a very expeditious last 12 or so minutes there, Pat. Good job.
I try.
So again, this was being recorded, so if you need to refer back to it, for those who are not familiar, I would always encourage you to reach out to your DA for the first time that you're doing sales, just to get the feel of the program and answer any questions. If you are a reappraisal town, when we do release sales, you may see the current year sales. We advise you to not validate any sales if you're a reappraisal that's effective for 2026, because once you wrap up your reappraisal, we will actually update all of those listed values, because we have to take a fresh look at all 3 years worth of sales. So you will be causing yourself some extra work and potential for error if you do those before your reappraisal is complete. So any reappraisal towns, please hold off. We do hope to give a class on how to validate sales for reappraisal towns. If you want to get started on those before we offer that class, certainly reach out to your district advisor so you can have a conversation about what's different in a reappraisal year.
And Jen is willing to kind of show us a couple of things about reporting in VT for sales. So Jen, do you want to take the helm?
Sure. right, so I'm gonna ask, is this big enough for people or should I make it bigger? Yeah, too far
I
into
think it's
this.
okay.
No, I think it's
I think
good.
it's okay. Okay. So similar to Pat, this is, what Pat just demonstrated. This is, when you log in, you're going to go to your equalization study and then you're going to go to your sales validation. And so, I think Pat just probably was in here working on Addison, which is why there's no sales left. So some of these reports that Deanna had mentioned earlier and Christy had mentioned earlier is a pre-excluded sales report. So if I generate that, these are all of the sales that are not going to show in your queue when you go to review your sales because of the way the PTTR was coded. And I'll bring it over. It's on my other screen here. And so here it comes. And it's an Excel format. And so it's going to say the span number, the buyer, the seller, your value, and then if there's an obvious reason that it came out, it's going to list it here in these columns U and V. Sometimes we don't have definitions for them, so these columns become empty. So that might be a clue to me as to why you might want to look into that a little bit further. So they automatically get removed from your sale list because their family sale, partial interest, all of the things that Deanna and Christy just kind of touched on. If you
Right.
see a
So-
sale, sorry, did you have
No, that's
something?
okay. So it's a good process to go through this report to make sure you have full inventory of everything that transacted in your town, right? You're sitting with your pile or your spreadsheet of sales. Did every sale show up somewhere? It's not on my list to review, so was it pre-excluded for some reason? And is that in fact correct? Should it have been pre-excluded, or was there an error somewhere and in fact it's a valid sale that accidentally got into this queue? And that's why we would want to check these.
Absolutely. And so if you find one on here, I'm gonna try not to make everybody dizzy as I kind of scoop back and cross. So if I looked at this one, line 12, because there's no definition as to why it got thrown out, and I say, oh no, this is a valid sale, I'm gonna reach out to my district advisor and I'm gonna say, listen, sale on span 10854, kind of give us the good stuff, right? The buyer, the seller, the span, data sale. Those things are helpful to us, and say, this should be included in my sales review. And so then it's not something that happens instantaneous, but we will work on getting that back into your queue for you to review. So it's really important, just to emphasize what Christy said, to take the time to look through this report to be sure, because I know there are a couple of towns that have, and they've found sales that should go into their sales review. So I'd strongly encourage that. Are there questions on this, or should I keep going? Or other comments from other district advisors?
No, I think you covered it.
Quiet, okay. All right, so I'm gonna get out of that. So I'll be back in this screen again. So remember, I'm in my equalization study. And so there's the breadcrumbs up at the top. So if I want to go back a screen, I can just use the top to navigate that. And I'm in my sales. And so if I run the report that's called the sales summary report, this report is going to come on my other screen too, but this is going to be all of your sales that you saw in your sales study and the previous 2 years. So it's going to show you basically everything that was reviewed at one point in time. And then if I go, I'm going to go left to right here. So if I continue to pan across the page here, it's going to say, it's going to say what you did to the sale. Okay. It's going to say what we, the state, did to the sale. And then it's also going to give comments. So it's going to give the comment that you made as a town. It's going to give the comment that we made as the state. And then, yeah, I don't think you get Christie's supervisor review. So you get what your district advisor did to your sales. So like, as you can see here, the town didn't throw whatever this sale was out, but the district advisor figured out that it was in a butter sale, so they threw that sale out. And maybe that was from talking to the town, or they sent a letter and they got information back. So this, you're going to be able to see kind of like what you did and then what we did. And so a couple of great things here. One is mark something as a family sale, but we updated it to partial interest. So it's learning maybe how to use the codes a little bit better. On top of figuring out that, oh, a subdivision happened and maybe that's because I updated the parcel to what it is this year. So, but I really should have left it as what's called the parent parcel. So where the sale originally happened. So I just think this is a great tool also to use to kind of just get a frame of reference about what you submitted versus what, what we found on the state level. And you can, once equalization is available, you could go back to your 2025 year and you could run this report to see that comparison, which some towns do after we release the equalization study results to just see where the differences were.
One comment that I get on this report, Jen, is that it's a lot of information. And like I said earlier, it's a dump of every data point between the PTTR and VTPI. So it can be very overwhelming. And I've worked with a couple of towns to pare this report down, particularly if they weren't already tracking their sales in their town. To give them a place to start, and then they can start entering the data on their own. So if you find this overwhelming, but you want to use it, reach out to your DA and we can probably help you.
Definitely. And then like, this is again, a great report to use to kind of, like Christy said, I have my pile of PTRs from the year sitting there and I'm going to go through one by one, and your DA could help you isolate your year if you wanted to. So right now I have 3 years worth of transfers, but maybe I just want from 3/1/24 to 3/31/25. And so your district advisor can kind of help you pare down that information so you could see what was there and just make sure that nothing is missing. Questions, comments, anything else to add on this? Anyone?
Not specifically on this, but I did see in the chat that someone asked Pat about the S1 versus R1 category. S1, so long ago and far away, we used to have R1, R2, and V1, V2 for vacation to indicate that it was something other than a full-time residence. That changed, I believe, somewhere in the 2010s, and maybe a little bit sooner than that, to be S1 and S2. And the difference here that you need to clue into, it speaks to valuation as much as it does to the category in this equalization study, is S1 and S2 should be limited to properties that are not saleable on the open market for typical full-time residential purposes. So they are going to be things that are camp construction, that may have less insulation, may be on piers and not on a full foundation. Other things that would indicate that the typical buyer on the market would not be looking to live there full-time. We certainly know plenty of people in every town that live in properties that would be classified and valued as camps, and that's how they choose to use their property. That is not how you would categorize it. So you're going to categorize it how it's built and how it would sell on the market, not how it is currently being used. I don't know if there's a better way to say that, or if you want to summarize that at all, Christy or Jen.
No, I mean, I think that, again, always, if you have any questions, you should talk to your district advisor.
I think I would also make a further delineation to make sure that you're not changing the category based on the ownership.
Mm-hmm.
One thing does not have anything to do with the other necessarily, right? what is the property, and then who happens to own it are two different questions. So when a transfer comes in, you may likely be changing the ownership type, but the property likely remains the same unless it's a subdivision or something like that, right? So that's the delineation and the problem that I think we see the most.
Yeah, and those are certainly all topics that we cover more in depth in things like our new lister or new and seasoned lister class and other trainings that we give. This one is specific to sales validation, so unfortunately we can't cover all of the things at this time. But just the simple rule of thumb is you don't change the category just because the property transacted.
Okay, I'm gonna minimize this. Was there anything else in VT-Pi that people either wanted me to re-review or you guys wanted me to touch on?
Is this a place where we might want to show them where they get their sales
Sure.
information? Because part of it is located there, correct?
Yes, so I'm gonna bring you back to the home screen. I wonder. I'll
If you can,
go.
assuming you can get there, Jen.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if I can show, maybe there's some in there. We're gonna go with it here. Okay, so back into the equalization study, and so you have an option that's called ratio studies. So you're gonna click on that. And so here is where Pat was showing. This is where you'd get your final sales study that we completed and you completed. So when we say go get your sales in VT-Pi, this is where we're talking about. And you're going to view it. And then you're going to use the reports. And there's one option, which is the certified sales. And so that's going to generate a PDF. Let me see. Might just take a minute to generate here. There it goes. Okay, so here is all of the sales in Addison for 2024 that were considered valid sales for the year. And so this is your certified sales report that that we refer to when we're talking about that. And I think Christy provided instructions back in January to go grab these. So that's how you would grab that information that would work together with your computation sheet. And these used to be on the website, but are not anymore. So
Correct.
and
So
I did
on the
go ahead.
on the website, you can still get a computation sheet, and you can still get a breakdown of the CLA for all of the towns, and you can still get a letter for all of the towns that shows what their CLA and COD was and equalized education grand list. You can't get these sales. If you need sales from a different town, you can either ask us or we can show you how to get them in VTAX, correct?
I don't know if they can get them in VTEX anymore.
Okay. Maybe we'll have
So you might
follow
have
up
to
on
just
that.
I believe
Yeah.
there is a PTTR lookup feature and you can look up other
Right.
municipalities. Yep.
Yes, you could look up the PTTRs for sure, but in terms of an actual sales report, I think you'll have to make the request.
So I'm going to go a little bit further, but we might want to, maybe we want to switch to Deanna, the town that you and I talked about, Deanna.
Sure.
Because I'm getting questions about what the certified sales report is, so I was just going to go through that.
Okay. Do you want me to keep this up or do you want me to go somewhere different?
We were going to bring up 2025 Clarendon
Okay.
sales.
You want to...
Yep, I have it up here.
Okay.
So to answer the question that I see in the chat, the certified sales report is all of the sales that were determined to be valid sales for the purposes of the study and that we use to base the results based on. Okay. So that's the answer to that question. What you're seeing on the screen right now is what's called a certified computation sheet. So what this is a summary of all the results. It looks very much like what you would know to be a 411, which is all the categories in your grand list, the property count, the values attached. And then what you'll see is an applied ratio for each category. So based on the sales, a ratio was determined for each category, and that's what then converts those values from your grand list values into an equalized value at 100%. Okay, so that's what's happening on this sheet, is all that conversion or applied ratio, converting it to 100% for equalization purposes and education liability therein. So when you look at this computation sheet and you want to say, well, where did those ratios come from, right? Talk about the first example here is the R1 category, and you see applied ratio of 6191. In order to know where that ratio came from, you would want to revert back to the sales. So you want to go to your sales and you want to look through to the end of that category. So we're in R1, right? And you're going to look towards the end of that category and you're going to say, was this category, were we statistically confident that this category should stand on its own? And the way that you know that is right there where it says category sample valid. If that said invalid, then we would not be using the ratio here. It says valid, which tells us that we are statistically confident that this ratio should stand on its own. Therefore, the ratio you should see on the comp sheet is that aggregate ratio right there below, 6191. And that's in fact what we saw, correct?
It sure is.
Okay, so now let's take one where it might be different. So if we were to look at mobile home unlanded, right, we see an applied ratio of 60/72. And you'll note that there's a little C next to it. And if you look down below, there is a key code there that says ratio source definitions, and the C indicates it's the class. So what does that mean? Where does that 60/72 come from? So we would go back to our sales and we would look for our mobile home unlanded to see if we had any sales in mobile home unlanded. We have some in mobile home landed. It doesn't appear that we have any unlanded. So we have to go to the back of all the sales where we get into the categories where we're combining sales. And yep, so we're going to go to what we call the residential category or class, sorry, which combines R1, R2, mobile home unlanded, mobile home landed, seasonal 1, seasonal 2, and other. And if we have a valid sample here, then we know that's what we would be taking for an aggregate ratio, which in fact we do. So 60/72 is what we should have seen on that comp sheet. Was that correct?
It is.
60/72. And then you'll note that you have some that say T for town, townwide. So that means, for example, commercial in this example goes to the town. So if we were to look up the commercial in our sales.
Sorry, guys, I'm scrolling.
We're going to
it's all
see
on
if
one
we
page.
had enough sales to be statistically confident, and you'll see that it says invalid. So we know we didn't use the category because it was invalid there. We're going to then look further in the back to the class to say, okay, well, the next biggest grouping is the class. Did we get a valid sample there? Invalid. So we can't use the class for this one. So then we go to the even bigger category, which is the town. And we do have a valid sample there. So we look to the aggregate ratio there, which is 64/18 for the town. And that should be what we see on the comp sheet for the commercial, 64/18. Okay, and then we've got one more winger here, which is an O. And you can see that the O in the little key code reverts to an override. So you'll note that that's in utility electric. So we do a spreadsheet independently to compare what you had for listed value to what the full value was, and then we hand enter this ratio or override the ratio for utility electric. You may also see it sometimes in utility other as well. Okay. So I just kind of wanted to give you those pieces so that you'd be able to find those ratios, because it's really important that you kind of have a good feeling about what we're doing here and that it's not just voodoo behind the scenes. And then I would also revert you to the bottom part of this computation sheet, which shows your CLA overall, 6189 in this example, and your COD, 2444. Okay. And your equalized values for the county and the state there as well.
Yeah.
Um,
So another plug for the category, the importance, as you see, every
Yep.
ratio here is provided by category. So if you inadvertently had a commercial property in your residential category, or had a residential property in your commercial, because maybe it was a house that they ran a little general store out of their first floor, but it was really best used as a residence. And that's how it ended up selling when the store closed. If that's in the wrong category, it's going to be averaged amongst unlike properties, and it might change those ratios, which will change your overall CLA. And on the other end of things, your tax rate.
Yep. So I think this will help you to kind of find things and recognize what we're doing and understanding. We can go through the math with you further in another at another time if you want to. District advisors can go through all the math with you if that's necessary. I think it just kind of gives you an overall where to find those ratios, which I think is important to bring this full circle. And then lastly, I think we were going to just show an example of a tax bill to kind of show you where that common level of appraisal also comes into play, that it's so important. And you can see just before you go off of this, Deanna, you can see that that common level is so important in just equalization, in that in this example, we're going from $270 million to an equalized amount of $416 million, right? So the equalizing process that brings it to 100% is directly mathematically impacted by that CLA, which is why it's so important and we want to get it right.
And I do say
We
that
do
there
have a
are some
couple
questions. Yep. Okay. Thanks, Teresa. I'll show the tax bill first. So what we're showing here on the screen is a resource right on our website. If you go into just Vermont Department of Taxes in this little box here and type in Vermont property tax bill, this will be one of the first resources that pops up. And it explains the entirety of the tax bill to both the town and the taxpayer. But the piece that we're going to focus in here is this section of your tax bill. All right. Did you want to take it from here, Christy?
Yeah, so you can see that the CLA is directly affected on the rate. So in other words, the beginning base rates are then adjusted by the CLA. And now we have a further adjustment, which is the statewide average CLA. So both things are important, but you can see where it would be particularly important to get your CLA right, because it directly affects dollars on a tax rate within your town. And I think what we just wanted to show is to drive home how important it is. And depending on the number of sales you have, you could see where one or two sales could really influence and hurt that CLA. So we really just want to get it right. We want to get it right for you, your taxpayers, and to make sure that we're doing a study that is accurately reflecting what's going on.
All right. And you said you had some questions, Teresa?
Is the certified final sales report all sales or just valid sales?
Just the valid sales.
Yeah, valid sales.
So if you're reviewing that certified sales report and you see things that are included or shouldn't have been included, that would be a reason to appeal your equalization study. But I think the window for that has closed for this year. But you should have gotten communication, 40 days ago? to be
35.
looking at those things. 35.
Yep.
Is there a set percentage of dispersion that is labeled as an outlier? Is it a particular range or does it depend on the sales?
So I can talk about outliers and extremes if you want to. If you want to go back to those sales, Deanna, happy to talk about that.
Yep.
So once you have qualified the sales and we have gone through them and made our adjustments, we're going to run these sales, and what you're going to see over to the right hand side is the ratio for each sale, right? Listed value divided by sales price is the individual ratio. And then if you keep scrolling down, you'll see in those 3 columns where it says T, C, or category, that's town, class, or category, you're going to see possible O's and E's. And if you can just find one for me, Deanna. There we go. Okay. So you can see in this example, reference number 109 there, Sabarsky, there is an O in the class. And what that means is statistically, it was considered an outlier for the class, not the category, but that larger class. So the outliers are the difference between the highs and lows is called an interquartile range, right? So statistically, an outlier is a 1.5 difference from that range of high to low, and an extreme is 3 times the difference. So what we're looking at is within the range of values, if we broke them up into quartiles, how far is that away from the median or the middle part of those values? And if it's somewhat far, it's considered an outlier. Those we would send a letter on, and we may or may not take them out based on the results of the letter. Okay, so you could see an O there, and it's still in the study and considered part of the study. It's just kind of an indicator that it's, was questioned and it's still there. If you see an E, which is an extreme, that means it's even further out. And so whether or not an extreme is excluded from the study depends on where we're going to for a ratio. And what I mean by that is if it was an extreme for the category and we're using the category ratio, then it would not be included in that calculation. Okay. If it was an extreme for every single thing, if you saw 3 E's across there, then it means that it was a statistical extreme and it's not going to be used in any of the calculations for the study. Okay, so in addition to you qualifying sales, we also have statistical measures whereby we question things further just based on the numbers, and or we disallow them just based on the numbers statistically.
All right.
Does that prompt questions or does that just confuse further?
I thought it was
Not
concise.
questions yet, but I do have other questions.
Okay, go for it.
There is no EQ option in past GL years like being shown.
Okay, I think, but if Pat's still here, he may have input on this. I think that's because what we've chosen to do for the time being is we've locked down the equalization study so that you can't verify sales yet until we were to have this training and we know that all the sales have been released from VTAX. Am I correct in that, Pat? And will they be able to see prior years when we open that back up?
I think he's hopped off. They
Okay,
will not
yes,
be
that
able to
is- that
see
is correct,
sales.
Christy.
So they won't be able to see the prior year sales. They will see everything that is there for them to verify for this year. But if they use the export of those Excel spreadsheets, they will see all 3 years there.
Okay.
And once we open equalization up, it will open for all of the years. So if you wanted to go into a previous year, you could.
Right. You could choose to go into your 2024 pie and see it there. Yes.
Exactly.
Yep. So within the next couple of weeks, you're going to get a notice on listserv that's going to say, we've opened up the sales. Here's your instructions further. You know, you've taken the training or you haven't, but at least we've given you instructions here. And now we want you to go ahead and start verifying sales. But for the moment, we've locked it down so we don't get bits and pieces out there being verified.
I did have a question that said, if it's just one piece, then it is not allowed in that column, but it is the other, but it is the others correct? I'm not quite sure.
Oh, okay. So in other words, if it was an extreme for the category, but not an extreme for the class or town, it would be included in the class and town ratios, but not in the category. Yes. I think they're on to exactly what's going on.
Okay.
Yep.
Next question is, how often or by what date do we verify sales in CAMA?
So your CAMA verification is actually going to be part of your transfers process, particularly if you're still using the NEMRIC Grand List module, that you indicate at that moment in time whether or not the sale is valid. If you're not using the Microsoft CAMA program, you might have to go into your Patriot or your other Vision program and identify them separately there. But I would talk to the contractor for those programs on how to do it there. I don't know if there's anything else you would add there, Christy?
Yeah, so there's verification that you'll do throughout the year on a sale as you enter it in your CAMA, and then there's this verification process where you're going to go into VTPI and do all of them, right? So you would use one as a resource for the other, if that makes sense.
Let's see, what is considered a satisfactory CLA?
There's no real satisfactory CLA anymore. It used to be used as a measure to have an order to reappraise. I don't.
Yeah.
I hate to make an estimate on that because I have a town
Yeah.
that has a 40 CLA right now.
Yeah.
And by no fault of their own, their market went crazy, just like everyone else's, and they had a pretty old reappraisal. So
Yeah.
their cost tables were not keeping up. It is possible to have a really bad CLA and an okay COD, right? So if that CLA is telling you on average, the sale prices in your town are this % off from fair market value. But the COD could indicate, if it's around a 10 or even up to a 15, that even though the sale prices are off, they are still all pretty close to each other in comparison to that listed value. That means that you still have some pretty good equity in your grand list.
Right.
I don't know if that helps.
Okay, why was the COD so much higher on the certified report than the averages shown?
Let me look.
So on the sheet that I have presented, the town-wide COD is 24.44, and it is much higher. You're right. Those are all weighted in addition to it's not a straight average of those numbers.
Yeah.
We could dig into your specific towns, Justin, if you have some questions there, just give me a call.
Yeah.
Somebody said I miswrote. How often or by what date to validate sales in VTPI?
Sales should be validated annually. And if you can have those back to us by August 1st, that is ideal. Sooner if possible, because once you're done with them, we have work that we need to do. And I think September 1st is the cutoff, that if you haven't submitted them back to us, then we will take them back and do the research ourselves, which means you won't have the opportunity until the appeal period to weigh in on whether or not those sales are valid. So it is in your best interest to do them as soon as possible. Did I get
I
those dates
think-
right, Christy?
Yes, you did. And I would encourage folks to, this is what often happens. Folks will start verifying sales and they will forget the submit button. So we end up having to call them back and say, it looks like you verified all your sales, but you never clicked the submit button. So it doesn't actually open it up for us and we can't get them. So just kind of pointing that out. Somebody asked a question about outliers. Did I address the outlier handling? I think I did, but I'll say it again. If it's labeled as an outlier, then a sales verification form automatically goes out. If we get more information to throw it out based on that form, then we might. If not, then it continues in the study, but it would just be labeled with that O for outlier. We good?
I think so.
Okay. Thanks, folks.